Okay, Alex, thank you very much for coming here. And
My
my
pleasure,
first
Mr.
question is,
Host.
how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Mr. Host. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad. I'm actually excited that we are having this talk. But before we do anything else, would you like to introduce yourself, do some KYC, maybe send a picture of yourself and your government ID?
Well, I'm Alex, co-founder at Local Monero and Agradesk. We've been running one of the biggest P2P trading platforms in the industry since 2017. So that's what, almost 5 years now. And 5 years in the crypto business is like 100 years in the normal business. So we've been around for a long time. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're going to talk about local Monero a lot. We're going to be talking about Monero itself a lot. And before we do that, I just wanted to explain to people how we met because that's actually pretty interesting. So I made a video where I laid out how I believe that YouTube has a multi-tier system, whatever. And I basically also criticized in that video how some creators are trying to offset this lower tier ad revenue system, I would say, with taking sponsorships or affiliates and stuff like that. And you came in, and I think this was first on the subreddit.
Yeah.
And you basically said you disagree with this statement that you think that it doesn't lead to compromised content when a creator takes sponsorship money because I just coincidentally flashed Local Monero with being like a sponsor of or affiliate of some of the creators, and that was completely coincidental. It was just like, okay, so like, what is the latest video where I can find this, and that's where I went. And this was not a shot at Local Monero or anyone else for that matter. This was just to show that people take sponsorship. That's it. So this was also not a critique of Local Monero at all, but it was just to show that from my perspective, the content that gives advice on privacy, we could group this together under privacy because Monero itself is trying to give people financial privacy.
Yep.
It'll be more pure or genuine if it wasn't tainted with financial interest. So Local Monero is a business, and they have an interest that is not necessarily going to be correlating with the interest of education or educational content. And yeah, that's how we met, and we started from there. And I invited you to come on the show, and you said yes. So this is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say about this particular issue?
The whole Reddit thread that we had on this topic, and actually you had this discussion on your subreddit, not just with me, but with some of your other, I guess, subscribers or members of the subreddit. I don't think a consensus was reached. There was some people that agreed with you, some people that disagreed with you. I'm obviously in the camp of not thinking that a sponsorship necessarily leads to compromised content, though it certainly can. I don't know what else I can really add to this discussion apart from rehashing the arguments that I've already written out in the comments. So, if you want to get into that, we can get into that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on Twitter, you also pointed out an example that I think is perfectly encapsulating this whole idea. You basically said something like, if a gardener makes content on YouTube and they take sponsorship from a garden tool and they believe that garden tool is the best, there is no compromise in there. But I would say, yeah, that's it. That's the problem. Like, if you're making a review and you're taking any sort of money, whether that's with an affiliate link or it's a sponsored review, it's not a review, it's an ad, right? And my problem is that when you have an environment where critical reviewers or educators are taking sponsorship from are susceptible to financial interests, then that corporate or financial interest is going to subsidize that kind of content that is positively speaking about their industry or their particular products or brands. And those that are not in favor of this positive coverage, those ones are not going to get that sponsorship, and they are going to be disincentivized from speaking against this. So you're going to have people who are, you're essentially buying a consensus, because you're going to have more people who are going to be speaking positively about your product than those that are just critical.
Mm-hmm.
And it does not necessarily have to happen, but this is, like an incentive structure for manufactured consensus.
It is, but that's not the only incentive at play in this dynamic. There's also the incentive of being honest with your audience and maintaining your audience. And it is, in fact, your audience that is the basis of the success of your channel, not the sponsors, right? The sponsors are only attracted to your channel because you have an audience, right? If you don't have any audience, nobody would want to sponsor you. Because, actually, maybe they would, as a sort of investment to for you to have the materials to be able to develop your channel to have audience in the future. But the goal is, for someone who's sponsoring, the goal is to get as many eyes as possible on the product, right? So the audience really is the end goal of this. And the content creator's incentive towards the audience is to maintain integrity. Because if you don't have integrity, then you're going to lose your audience. Maybe not immediately, but certainly eventually. Like if you start sponsoring some scam and then people start finding out that it's a scam, and then people see that you took sponsorship from that scam, obviously you'll be associated with that scam, and therefore you'll lose integrity and lose potential future viewership. And I actually, in the gardening example that I gave, I wasn't talking about a review specifically. I was actually talking about just having the gardening tool company sponsoring the channel in general. So I agree with the sentiment that if a company pays a content creator to review the product, that it could be viewed as an ad rather than a review. I get that. But I wasn't talking about that specific case. I was just talking about the case when, a gardening channel, in videos that don't specifically talk about that tool, just, talk about some other topic, do the segment in the middle of the video. Oh, this video is sponsored by gardening company X, So like the gardening video might be talking about how to tend to your palm trees or whatever. And the gardening tool company might have nothing to do with tending to palm trees. It might just be a tool specialized on something completely different. But they get mentioned in the video because there is a lot of overlap from the audience that would be maybe interested in that gardening tool anyway, despite the fact that this video isn't specifically tailored to that gardening tool. You see what I mean? So it's like the gardening tool company is interested in sponsoring videos that are not reviews of that specific gardening tool because there's a lot of overlap in the audience of people who'd be interested in the content of the gardening video concerning palm trees, but they might also be interested in that other thing. So that's why there's an interest for the gardening tool company to sponsor it. So yeah, the review thing, that's a bit more iffy, but like what we do with Tech Lore, for example, the sponsorship videos weren't Monero specific in the sense of Tech Lore was talking about Matrix, and I think there was another video about Spotify alternatives that are free and open source. So it's like they're not talking about Monero specifically, or where to buy Monero or where to sell Monero, but we are the sponsors on that video because there's a lot of audience overlap. It wasn't a review of Local Monero, right? And most sponsorship operate like this. I mean, the ever pervasive VPN sponsorships, and I totally agree with you that the sort of ExpressVPN and other products that constantly get featured on a bunch of podcasts have very serious privacy issues. And of course, if you want to run an actually, I mean, not the maximum, I guess, security that you can get from a VPN, you should be running that VPN yourself. You should be getting a VPS and setting up WireGuard or something else, and maintaining that server yourself, so that way you know there's the logs that do happen are controlled by you. And I mean, most of them, of course, there's the ISP logs, and you can't really avoid that in any case. But as much as you can possibly get control of the logging and the encryption and everything, you should be running your own VPS to run your own VPN and not using one of these companies. Oh, I went off on a tangent here. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, yeah, these sorts of sponsorships can be problematic, but at the same time, for some reason, I tend to believe that the podcast and YouTube channel creators that do take sponsorships from places like ExpressVPN aren't really aware of these things. They're not really experts. Like, I would be very surprised to see these sorts of sponsorships on super privacy channel, like really expert content creators who really do know what they're talking about. And then they would start promoting ExpressVPN. Now that would be questionable, definitely. And I'm sure the audience would let them know about that. Yeah. So it's as I've said in the comments, like it's a mixed bag. It can happen, but not necessarily. But no, of course, all the examples that you gave are also accurate, and I agree that those are cases of compromise. I just think it's not a given, and I think there's plenty of examples of integrity in content despite there being a sponsorship. So the incentive structure exists in the way that you describe it, but it also exists, I think, in terms of there is a lot of incentive for integrity too.
My main issue with this is that I worry about conflict of interests, and I worry about corporate influence in media, mostly media, but also science, medicine, and in politics as well. And on the surface, they might sound unrelated, but they sort of are, because when you're looking at it from the perspective of the corporations, of the businesses, and you explain it like perfectly there, that they have the interest to target an audience. But here's the problem: like, we are having this massive conglomeration of US media or even global media, whether they are just being purchased and owned with these acquisitions and mergers, or the advertisers are basically, or the advertising networks are basically controlling the media dissemination in like news TV, but also in news outlets. And this is a problem also in medicine. Like, there is a good article that came out from the British Medical Journal recently, and they warned that medicine is being tainted, or like treatment, like healthcare, is being tainted by big pharmaceutical influence, because they are they are overemphasizing, like treatments that people can buy, like prescriptions, and then it leads to a neglect of like behavioral treatments or something like that. And now doctors and the entire systems are incentivized towards, prescription drugs, and even like maybe some vaccines or whatever. I don't want to get into that area at all, but and this is similar with politics. Like in the United States, for example, you have some transparency laws, so basically you know what politicians are getting bought by whom, but that doesn't really change the fact that they are getting bought.
Oh yeah.
You have the issue. You have the issue with members of Congress investing in stock and becoming millionaires because of it, and that's a conflict of interest.
Yes.
It's and this is also a problem like in journalism. Like journalists, they have to disclose if they own stock, which is also a conflict of interest. And the fact that they disclose it, it doesn't make it better. It's still the conflict of interest is still there. And for me, the conflict of interest is not present just when the person is talking about that particular thing. Like, for example, if someone would be talking about Monero and they would only take like something that's not related to Monero, I still think that if they have taken a Monero sponsorship at any point, like from Local Monero, from in other videos where they're not talking about Monero at all, like you suggested with they were talking about Matrix, I still think that's a conflict of interest for the channel itself, because now you're basically like crafting your content around some affiliations or sponsorships, and it's not necessarily driven by whatever is purely educational. We find this to be an issue in medicine, in science. Scientists also have to disclose who is funding their research. But on top of that, because disclosing what research is funded is not enough, you have scientific methods and peer review process. And these two are very strong to eliminate a lot of biases that people have, but they are virtually, like these two standards are virtually non-existent anywhere else. They're not even present in like ethical journalism, or they're completely absent in YouTube content or social media content creation. So we don't actually have the tools that will allow us to eliminate the bias. And I think what I would want from these people is to admit to the bias, that even if the content is not compromised, there is bias. And even like you could say, in the scientific research that has the peer review process and has the scientific methods that are objective, you still have the problem that the funding, when it's private funding, that funding is also sort of buying consensus, because it happens that if the results of a research are negative towards the goal of the funder, then the research does not get published. And this creates these false narratives when you're trying to do a meta-analysis where only that research that is non-conclusive or leads to positive conclusions towards that industry or the brand, company, whatever, only that is going to be published. And I'm not entirely sure how this is prevalent in science, but it is a problem. And this is why government-funded science is still problematic in some cases, but it's more pure than privately funded research. And that's already with like scientific methods and peer review process, and that you don't have that in social media content creation. And when you're exposing yourself as a creator to accepting sponsorship, then you don't have a method to eliminate bias. You can say that you're transparent, you can say that you are trying to promote products that you're using. I have plenty of things to say about both those points. I don't think that does anything to remove the bias. I think you would have to introduce peer review process. You would have to introduce objective methods. But right now we don't have that, and that's why I decided to shoot myself in both of my feet and my knees with refusing to accept any sort of affiliations and sponsorship, because. And I've been approached by companies many times, and I just said, well, listen, I can't do this. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to have you on. I'm perfectly happy to talk to you, but this is not going to be promotional. And I just can't figure out a way how to remove the bias from its sponsored content, so that I decided to not take sponsors. And I agree with you. You said in the beginning that there is not consensus on this, that people disagree. People that are like... like on my Patreon page, they told me that, well, I bought like System 76 laptop because of your video, and I think you should have gotten a cut from it. And it would be perfectly fine with them if I was affiliated with System 76. I was like, yeah, thank you, but no. Right, so I guess that's all I needed to say about this.
Yeah, look, as for the argument about peer review and the lack of peer review, I have to slightly disagree, because I think sort of channels bashing other channels for being sellouts is a form of peer review, is it not? You are peers and you're reviewing each other, are you not? So like it might not be
I would say
standardized in the scientific way, but it's certainly a form of it, isn't it?
it's a community critique, you could say, but
Community
I would say
critique, peer
that
review. I mean,
no, not necessarily,
okay.
because you have peers, you know, like you have PhD peers, and we are not peers because we don't have PhDs. So,
You
and
think
it's PhD is not just a
credentials
title.
that define?
It's not just I mean, credentials do matter, right? So,
They
but
do.
it's well, and they do in science, yeah,
Yeah, they do. They do.
yeah, yeah, and but I would just say that I didn't bash anyone to be a sellout, and that wasn't my intention. If someone's reading is that, and
Oh, I wasn't talking
yeah,
about
it's
your specific case. I was just talking in
yeah,
general that channels do bash other channels for, the bad things that they do. It happens on YouTube all the time. There's YouTube drama
yeah.
going on all the time.
Yeah. I mean, there are always going to be problems. Nothing is perfect. Even audience-funded content is not perfect. You know, there are problems. Like, some companies, don't quote me on this, I'm going to say The Guardian, but I'm not entirely sure. I think they have some sort of a trust through which they invest in stock, and it's diversified, so no particular industry is preferred. And that gives them the ability to produce journalism for free for everyone. I guess that's one way to do it. I don't have a trust, and I think you could say that if you have audience-funded research, then you're catering to your audience all the time. Like nothing is gonna be perfect. I made a video on Monero, and you could say that because I mentioned that I have a Monero address, that people can send me some Monero, then that's a conflict of interest. And I would say, yeah, it probably is. And it'll be the same conflict of interest as if I owned stock in Tesla and I was making Tesla reviews or whatever. And I guess the thing is that nothing is going to be perfect, but you have to choose how you want to approach the bias limitation. And I guess you're a business, so this doesn't concern you that much, because as a business, as an individual, it might be different. But I don't know. I just what I wanted to do with that particular segment in that video is that people should be aware that this is a bias, and I would appreciate if content creators admitted that this is a bias. For now, the culture is to completely reject that notion. They would say they're transparent, they are recommending products that they themselves use, etc., etc. I still would say that's a bias, and that's what I want them to be honest about. And yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah.
Well, your position is very much understandable, and I think there is enough space for many different approaches, and I guess the audience will decide which approach gives them more gives them more positive externalities, right? So it might be the case that your channel, through its approach, might get more audience. It might be the case that other channels, through their approaches, might get more. Or it might be that you share your audiences. After all, there's a lot of overlap between different channels and different approaches, especially if they cover the same topics. So yeah, there's always going to be, the dogmatic approach and the pragmatic approach, and I don't think they necessarily have to stand in opposition to each other. They might coexist.
Yeah, I perfectly agree with that, because I think people should realize that it is possible to both enjoy a piece of medium and remain critical of some of its aspects at the same time. And I feel like that if I criticize one aspect of someone's content, people are taking that as a shot, and that's on their entire personality or their entire project. that wasn't even my intention. And also like that was actually like a minor point in that video. Like the most important point was about the algorithm, and I should have approached it like in an analytical way. I was a bit more emotional there, I would say, because I think you could prove with the numbers how certain channels get more of their videos recommended per frame. And I've done this but it was not. I didn't have enough data. I would have to have like hundreds of channels compared, which would take a long time. But I still believe in the general message. So yeah, I wanted to say that I appreciate that you came to the subreddit and you voiced your disagreement. I think it is important to have that. I appreciate it very much, and I guess we can both still disagree and still like work on other things where we do agree,
Of
right?
course.
And or have talks or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate it a lot.
I appreciate you for having me and for having this discussion with me. It's definitely a demonstration that the things that unite us to us are more important than the things that divide us. Yeah, and I think that's the key to progressing the movement of privacy, especially digital privacy, in our space. Yeah, I think we're doing a good job to pat ourselves on the back.
Oh yeah. We need that sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, speaking of digital privacy, so Local Monero, or Monero in general, is about financial privacy.
Yep.
So maybe a lot of people are going to know what Monero is, but we are going to get there as well. But first, what the hell is Local Monero? What are you trying to do with it?
All right, so I don't know if we can cover what Local Monero is without covering what Monero is, but I'm going to try. Monero, I'll do a quick, brief intro to Monero. So Monero is a cryptocurrency. It is open source. It was started by an anonymous founder. It's based on the CryptoNote protocol, and the differentiating aspect from at least Bitcoin is that, unlike Bitcoin, the ledger, meaning the place where the transactions are recorded in the network, is opaque as opposed to transparent. So most people who have heard of Bitcoin think of it as anonymous or private, and people like to confuse those two terms. They are very distinct. Anonymity means you don't know who did a thing. Privacy means you don't know what was done or whether it was done at all. And so anonymity and privacy are very distinct concepts. Bitcoin can be anonymous, meaning you might successfully avoid associating your real identity with a transaction or a particular wallet or address. However, Bitcoin is not private in the sense of all the transactions are publicly known, all the active addresses are publicly known, easily searchable, linkable, and all that kind of stuff. In Monero, this is not the case, or at least it's not the case currently. We don't know if the encryption and the different fundamental protocols that make Monero private will ever be cracked in the future. But as it currently stands, it is private, or as far as we know, it is private. And that's the main difference between Bitcoin and Monero, is that it's a completely opaque ledger. Now, because of the opaqueness of the ledger, in my opinion at least, it's much closer to the original cypherpunk ideals that was supposed to be embodied in Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first attempt at this kind of a currency, and implementing privacy is very difficult in a decentralized ledger. So that's probably why it wasn't built into Bitcoin from the start. In fact, we have tweets from Hal Finney, who was the first person to ever receive a Bitcoin transaction and was probably very closely associated with Satoshi. We have a tweet of him saying that they're thinking of more ways to make Bitcoin closer to what Monero is today. And this was back in, 2008, I think, if I remember correctly. So they were definitely thinking about this, but they just didn't, I guess, have the time or the expertise to be able to do it by themselves. So Bitcoin is basically like the first attempt that gets you sort of halfway there, but not completely there. So Monero, in my opinion, is much closer to that cypherpunk ideal. And when you are trying to create a currency that is as cypherpunk as possible, it's not sort of enough to have that currency. You also need to have an ecosystem around it, right? So Local Monero is trying to be a part of that ecosystem. We have the normal centralized exchanges where if you want to trade a certain cryptocurrency, be it Monero or anything else, you do have to go through a certain verification process. You have to give your real name, your residential address, sometimes something else, depending on what the centralized exchange wants you to give them. And sometimes they ask you even more stuff along the way after you're verified already. Local Monero is not a centralized exchange. Local Monero is a peer-to-peer trading platform, meaning any person that has Monero can set up an advertisement on our platform offering to sell Monero, or someone who wants to buy Monero can respond to one of those advertisements. Or they can also post their own advertisement indicating that they wish to buy Monero and have a seller respond to them. We try to make our platform require as little information as possible about every user. So we don't even require an email on sign up. Our goal is to basically maximize user privacy and user anonymity. And within the toolbox that we give our users, we give them, for example, a Tor portal to be able to log into the website without exposing their true IP. There's also actually an EAP site. I2P is like an alternative privacy network, I guess, to Tor. It's much slower and much less stable, but some people distrust Tor, so there's an option for them as well. We delete trade chat logs after 180 days. It's very easy to delete your account. We basically try to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to transact with their Monero in a private way, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give that alternative no KYC platform for individuals to be able to really maximize their participation in the cypherpunk, I guess, parallel economy, or maybe it's not parallel. I guess it's part of the normal economy, but people like to call it parallel. and sort of help people avoid having to go through centralized exchanges where huge amounts of information about them is being collected. Information that sometimes gets hacked and leaked, and you can delete your account on Local Monero, but you can never sort of change your identity documents. You can change your passport and stuff like that, but your name stays the same, or your ID number stays the same, or your face certainly never changes. I guess no. I guess you can change your face too. Well, you get what I mean. You have certain immutable characteristics about you that are very difficult to change. And sometimes centralized exchanges do get hacked, and this stuff does get leaked. And there are many other reasons to be wary of giving your data to centralized exchanges that lead you to want to trade on avenues that don't require that. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give the cypherpunk way of trading Monero, basically.
Right. So I think the first thing that I'd like to unpack here is the problem of centralized exchanges when it comes to your privacy. So you mentioned KYC, and that's know your customer. They usually require like your proof of ID, proof of address, and something like that. And the problem with this is that, like if you do this with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's blockchain is transparent, now you have companies who are making a lot of money offering sort of chain analysis tools to law enforcement, governments, even private corporations. And what this does is that they are trying to deterministically, if that's a word,
It is.
predict who is transacting with whom, and to trace every single coin, every single transaction to someone's real life identity. Now, opposite to this would be probabilistic tracking that tries to find someone's identity and their activity without knowing any identifiers. So they would be tracking someone's profile, but they wouldn't be mathematically sure that it belongs to any sort of particular person. Both of these are pretty bad. Now, when you go to a central exchange, you have to give up your data. So you have to associate your address with your real name, and that associates all of your transactions with that name, and that goes for your past transactions as well as your future transactions. So Bitcoin, from my perspective, I'm going to say it is the most useless currency as a daily currency that you're supposed to buy groceries with, because anytime you make a transaction at your bar, or like in a grocery store or wherever, they're going to be able to know all of your transactions in the past and in the future, and they're going to be able to trace that back to your identity with 100% certainty. And that's a problem. And I don't even know why people are not talking about this more. I guess there's the Lightning Network, but I assume that what I like about Monero, what it's doing, is that it's trying to be private by default. It's sort of like what Signal brought to the messaging, is that, before Signal we had messaging platforms that were optionally private. But Monero is the opposite. Monero is actually private by default. It's just opaque, and there is no transparency on the blockchain as far as we know, unless it was broken. But for now, I guess it's not. And now, from what you've said, I assume that Local Monero is trying to fill in that gap by removing centralized exchanges from tying your identity to your Monero transactions. Now, I don't know how this service is used. I guess you know this better, but this is going to raise a lot of red flags with like normies, regular people. And yeah, how do you prevent like abuse, or like what if governments just decide to like, okay, well, this is too far for us. We don't even know how to tax this thing. I would say, yeah, this is what I'm interested in the most. How would you even go about taxing this if you can just allow people to anonymously make transactions or exchange Monero with fiat or whatever currency out there, and the IRS would not be able to get them? Or is the IRS able to get people through Local Monero?
Well, as for taxing, there existed a period in human history where transactions were mostly not recorded. Most transactions were not recorded because people interacted with each other financially through exchanging seashells, crocodile statues, gold coins, silver coins, paper money. I mean, and I think that period of human history covers about 99.9 something percent of human history. So having this sort of easily searchable database of most transactions in an economy is a relatively new thing in human history. And it only started, I think, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 60. I'm not sure exactly. But yeah, most transactions have always been as Monero is, in the sense of opaque or, private and untraceable, right? So, and yet governments did tax throughout this period. I believe they did. I'm not sure. I didn't live back then, but history seems to say that they did. So it would certainly force governments into different, perhaps, modes of taxation or methods of taxation. The income tax, for example, didn't used to be a thing until relatively recently. People would generally be taxed either on tariffs, import tariffs primarily, or they would be taxed on their transactions during sales, stuff like that. So I guess forms of indirect taxation might make a big comeback if Monero were to be adopted on a global scale. And I mean, I'm not too worried about government's ability to tax. I mean, I think they'll be fine. If there's something that they know how to do, it's taxing people. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Sorry, what was your other questions?
Well, you answered this one very, very well, I have to say. But the other questions are mostly revolving around the government's ability to crack down on Monero or local Monero, because they might say, okay, we will be fine with Monero, but we want KYC. You're not doing any KYC. So what if, the government just decides, well, no local Monero anymore?
They could decide that. They definitely could. And the question then becomes, well, just because the government decided something, does that mean that it's going to happen? So, for example, if a legislature passes a law saying that gravity is now going to work not from up to down, it's going to go from down to up, does that make it so? And I think that most people would agree that it's not laws that define reality. I mean, not legislative laws. I mean, laws of physics, of course. So if you have a situation where the very nature of peer-to-peer trading becomes, say, illegal, does that mean that peer-to-peer trading goes away? I mean, Local Monero specifically might stop existing. That's certainly true. But we do have in development and also existing decentralized trading platforms that do not have any sort of central server. So Bisq is one example that exists for a relatively long time. Bisq has its problems, of course, but it exists. We have Havino that's currently in development. Havino certainly going to have its problems, but it shall exist. And of course, if there is a real concentrated effort on cracking down on platforms like ours or other P2P trading platforms that currently exist, there's going to be even more pressure to develop alternatives that circumvent this, right? We have, for example, nations, huge nations, extremely powerful nations that block their citizens from accessing the internet. And yet, people from inside those nations are able to access the internet through various tools. And those tools keep evolving over time, just as the attack on those tools keeps evolving all the time. So it's a cat and mouse game that's constantly happening between the oppressors and the oppressed. And fundamentally, I think the oppressed do have an advantage in that they are the ones that are primarily proactive in this race. The people who sort of circumvent censorship are the ones that have the initiative in this battle, and those that try to repress that initiative always have to be reacting to something new. And it's much easier to encrypt something than it is to decrypt something, right? So there is an asymmetry between freedom of information and repression of information. And I think this is an asymmetry that cannot be overcome. And I think because of this asymmetry, fundamentally, even if there are certain laws that are passed that ban certain types of information technologies, information finds a way.
So, speaking of some of these repressive countries, do you know if Local Monero specifically is being used in Iran, China, Russia?
I'm sure there are people that find ways to use Local Monero despite it being censored, yes.
Okay, so Local Monero is pretty much available globally.
Just like pretty much any other website is available globally, in the sense of YouTube is, let's say, in China, completely blocked, but you can definitely find a way to access YouTube if you are in China. I mean, people in China access YouTube through a combination of VPNs and Tor bridges and obfuscation protocols that sort of mask their traffic to look like normal SSL traffic. There's a lot of technologies that people in censored countries use to access censored websites. Yeah. Even if, let's say, China completely disconnected itself from the external internet, there would be most likely, I assume, relays set up at the borders that would use antenna to catch 4G signals from neighboring countries and then retranslate them within the country. So I don't really... Oh, and of course we have Starlink coming up soon. It's actually already active in Ukraine, as far as I understand. I've heard Elon Musk shipping Starlink to Ukrainian cities for them to maintain internet connections. So when you have the internet coming from above, I mean, what are they going to do? Block the sky? Like this? Like it's game over. I think there is, like, you can try to hold back the tide, but it's just a matter of time, I think.
So I assume you're pretty optimistic about the future when it comes to this?
Yes, I'd say I'm pretty optimistic. That there's thanks to the internet, there has been a huge emancipation of information. And it's not, I think, a genie that you can put back into the bottle. Of course, it's not all sunshine and roses, right? There are some aspects of this Pandora's box that are negative. Some people that were never able to find each other before can now huddle together and sort of grow together in their own rotten juices. I don't know, but apart from those aspects, I think overall it's been an extremely positive development in mankind's history, and we have way more positive externalities out of this than we do negative. There used to be, you talk about the conglomeration of media companies, right? It used to be that you only had basically 3 channels on TV, and and if you controlled those 3 channels, you basically control the entire narrative around anything that you wish. Whereas today, it's much, much more difficult for any actor interested in controlling a narrative to control the narrative, because the internet allows pretty much anyone with a camera, a microphone, or heck, even just a keyboard to completely destroy your narrative. And the truth, while it may not always be obvious, I think in the end, the truth always wins, because the truth is in agreement with reality, whereas lies require constant protection from reality. You know what I mean? So the truth might not always win immediately, but the truth in the end, I think, always wins.
Well, that's definitely very optimistic. I don't know. I'm a little bit worried about the government's increasing ability to crack down on that free flow of information, because China has been pretty successful at it, and they are using multiple layers to do this. Like, they have the great Chinese firewall, of course, but then they go to these companies and they tell them to implement like content filters straight into the messaging platforms, and then they make laws like, if you make a chat group in one of these Chinese apps, you're legally responsible for the content that anyone says there. And measures like this are to sort of prevent people from grouping together to form dissent against Chinese government. And you could do that with the US corporations as well, because you only have like a handful of them that control a lot of the free flow of information. You don't have to rely on them, but if you're removed from the Google search, 70 to 90% of the people are not going to find you. Similar with the Amazon marketplace or the Amazon cloud. If they remove you from there, it's going to be very hard for your users to use your service. So yeah, I think we are in a transition period, and I want to be optimistic about what's going to happen, but I'm not entirely sure. For me, I thought that the cypherpunk or cypherpunk ideals, yeah, that were embodied in the original Bitcoin white paper, I believed in those, and I kind of still do, but I'm becoming increasingly more skeptical of the cryptocurrency implementation of it, because I don't know, like, it sort of feels like Bitcoins had a chance to become Monero, and it hasn't. And I feel like it has been taken over by all sorts of different actors. Like, miners definitely do have very strong control over the consensus, now the mining pools, and it feels like Bitcoin has been hijacked, and the entire cryptocurrency sphere has been hijacked by this, I don't know, like, overemphasis on the price and the moonshots and everything like that, rocket ship emojis. And it's like, for me, the price should not matter at all. Like, it should be really about the implementation, about making sure that the privacy, security, and availability of the blockchain is constantly improving, and that's what should matter. And also the adoption should matter. But we don't see too much adoption. We don't see too much improvement either. And I see Monero as sort of an exception in a way that Monero is trying to be like ASIC resistant, or it's trying to constantly improve its algorithm to make sure that the addresses are more and more anonymous, introducing more ways to make sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Decentralizing because you mentioned mining pools. Monero has a
Yeah.
P2 pool built into the wallets, which is basically a way to completely decentralize mining, such that there's no more need for mining pools. So even that aspect is being attacked.
Yeah, yeah, and that's good. But then, there are some people are just overselling blockchain currencies. And, some people say that, well, this is the answer to the Fed. And I believe that Fed has a lot of problems. Like, central banking has a lot of problems today because they are basically unelected bodies that are deciding about the value of the money in our wallets. But I'm not sure that trusting some anonymous developers with our monetary policy is the solution. And I think that Ethereum going deflationary, I really think that's a dumb idea. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I don't think that Vitaly is expert on economics either. And that's the thing, like I mean, Monero is trying to offer that financial privacy, right? And it has some monetary policy built into the algorithm. But I don't know about its future. I feel like there is no democratic control over where Monero is headed. And I feel like it's like we have this group of core developers, most of them or probably all of them are anonymous, and they're making decisions on what goes into the algorithm. Of course, there is the consensus of the network itself, but I don't know. It's I feel like that at the end of the day, people care about how much food and how much food they can buy and how much rent they have to pay. And I'm not sure if cryptocurrency is making it easier for people or not, because with Bitcoin being capped at a certain amount of coins and satoshis, it's sort of like the sooner you get into this game, the better for you, and the more you hoard, the better. And this is not necessarily going to be good to erase some other financial issues that we have today, like incredible wealth and income inequality and stuff like that. So I feel like, I don't know, I don't see Bitcoin as a solution anymore at all. And I see Monero as a solution only to the privacy aspect. And I feel like that the only people who will take advantage of Monero's privacy are the people who, I don't want to be that guy who says that only criminals use privacy, because I don't view that at all. But that's what I believe Monero is being used for the most, or would be.
Well, the privacy aspect in Monero is fundamentally important for, I think, the property known as fungibility. Do you know what fungibility is?
Yes, but you can explain that to people because not everyone will be familiar.
All right. So fungibility is a concept that basically means one unit of a thing is equal in value to any other unit of that same thing. So, for example, 1 ounce of gold is equal in value to any other ounce of gold of the same purity. Or one $100 bill is equal to any other $100 bill. They're both worth $100. But in, say, Bitcoin, the units are not equal to each other. I mean, they are equal in the programmatic sense of the word equal. Like when you transact in your wallet, every unit is equal to each other. However, the problem with fungibility in Bitcoin is that because of a lack of privacy, because every coin has a traceable history, a coin that is freshly minted, freshly mined, is more valuable than a coin that has a long history behind it. Why is that? Well, because if you own a Bitcoin that has a relatively long history, there is always a chance, and the longer the history is, the bigger the chance, that at a certain point, this coin was involved in something that you don't want to be associated with. Maybe somebody used that coin to, I don't know, let's say buy child porn, right? And then later on, if the flow of that coin ends up somewhere in your wallet, well, you can potentially become a suspect in a criminal investigation. So sometimes, well, actually, this has already happened. Coins get blacklisted in the sense of certain addresses that have certain amounts of Bitcoin get added to a special blacklist. And if you get added to that blacklist, basically nobody will ever want to accept those coins from you. They become essentially worthless, right? So this is where the lack of fungibility in Bitcoin is really, I think, the fundamental problem that a lack of privacy in the protocol creates. And it is where Monero becomes, let's say, the obvious choice in what shall become the next generation of money, right? If we're trying to trace the evolution of money from seashells to crocodile statues to stones at the bottom of the sea, the real thing, to gold coins, silver coins, and everything. At least in the case of precious metal coins, they were fungible, and dollar bills are fungible, but Bitcoin is not, and Monero is. So if you want to bet on what's going to be next gen money, I think Monero is a much more solid bet. There's a lot of other scenarios. You talk about how privacy can only be or is primarily only currently used by criminals. I mean, I disagree with that. I think there's way more legitimate uses of legitimate users of Monero than there are criminals, and I think criminals still mostly use Bitcoin. I mean, for example, ransomware. They almost always tell you to pay them in Bitcoin. This has been changing relatively recently, where they have started adding a Monero address in addition to the Bitcoin address. I don't know if there exists ransomware, prominent ransomware that only accepts Monero, but I may be wrong. But yeah, criminals are definitely, like, if we're talking about, I mean, if we're talking overall, criminals definitely use US dollars way more than they use any cryptocurrency. Like, let's start with that. But just because criminals use US dollars does not mean that US dollars are evil by nature, right? Just because criminals use cars doesn't mean that we should ban cars. Just because criminals drink water, et cetera, et cetera. Money is as fundamental to human existence as cars and water and a bunch of other things. So it is not surprising that money would be used by criminals, just like water is drunk by criminals. So I think that argument doesn't really hold water. It's certainly going to be used, especially by demagogues who are either working for people who want to shut cryptocurrencies down, or just because they're misguided. But I think most people understand that most people who at least are genuinely considering cryptocurrencies as a potential next-gen money I don't think this argument holds water with them. I mean, like this argument is primarily, I think, disseminated by these same media conglomerates that have been wrong about everything, always. So
yeah, it's basically the same anti-encryption argument that we've been hearing for a long time now.
Yeah. So the thinking people, I don't want to insult most people in the world, but I think the thinking people, the people who are genuinely considering these questions, don't really care about this argument too much. But I mean, I can give you more examples of privacy in the financial context mattering a lot. So, I mean, we can imagine a world where Bitcoin becomes the world currency. Like everybody in the world, just like it used to be with gold, everybody in the world sort of uses Bitcoin to transact with each other. And let's keep in mind that Bitcoin is a transparent ledger. So what would be the possible implications of this kind of world? Let's do some Black Mirror kind of content. Number one, I think, would be a lack of physical safety. So let's say you're traveling through parts of a country with like a high crime rate, and you go into some convenience store and you want to buy yourself a refreshing soft drink, and you use your wallet, your Bitcoin wallet, to pay for that. So if you have a significant amount of money, then the cashier will immediately be able to trace that, and it would be now known that there is a guy with a sizable wallet in our dangerous neighborhood, right? So your physical safety is now under threat, right? The cashier might be in cahoots with some local gangs, and they immediately get the tip off that as soon as you leave the convenience store, you should be abducted and beaten with a wrench until you give out your mnemonic seed, right? So that is one implication. Your physical safety in high crime areas is very much under threat if you ever transact with your Bitcoin wallet. Another example would be trade secrecy. So if you're a business and you make a payment to your supplier, then now your supplier knows how much money your business has, and the transactions that your business does, and all that kind of stuff. And because they see every single payment that you've received, they can understand how sensitive you are in future negotiations. So they can use that information against you very effectively and they can roughly determine how many customers you have and how much you charge them. And, all of this is like very commercially sensitive information that under current circumstances, businesses guard. And the damage to your negotiating position is enough to cause you significant financial loss. So that's one other case where Bitcoin would be, the Bitcoin world implication of this. Price discrimination is how this would be applied against a private citizen, right? So in the context of business, it would be negotiating with a supplier. In the context of a private citizen, it could be buying something on Amazon or whatever. If you transact with Bitcoin and you buy something off of, say, Amazon will use its large array of servers to deduce all of your spending activity and deduce how much you earn and use that information against you. They would adjust the prices of products to sort of maximize how much they can squeeze out of you, knowing how much you earn and how much you're willing to spend, right? So if something that would normally cost 15 Satoshi If they know that you're a relatively high income earner, they can jack up the price to 57 Satoshi. And you wouldn't even know that they did that. For you, it would just be you just loaded the page of this product, and the price, the price always was 57 Satoshi as far as you understand it. You would have no idea that they're using your financial information against you. But that would be the case because everything is transparent, everything can be traced, right? And the final problem is, of course, the tainted funds problem, which I already touched upon. So if you sell cupcakes, somebody pays you. You think it's a good day that you sold another cupcake, but it turns out that the coins that you were paid with were at one point involved in criminal activity, very serious criminal activity. And then the next day you get a knock from the police because the chain analysis company told them that the coins went to you. And guess what? Now you're a suspect in a criminal investigation, So Monero solves all of this by having a opaque ledger and by being fungible. So, while criminals come to mind to people who really haven't thought deeply about this as the most obvious reason why you would want financial privacy, who would want financial privacy, the truth is people fundamentally behave in a way that reveals their preference for financial privacy. People guard their financial privacy a lot. And it is practically obvious, I think, to anyone who really sits down and thinks about this for a while, that it is absolutely essential that if we adopt a certain currency in the future as the next generation of money, that it has to be a privacy coin, or what is deemed to be a privacy coin. In the Monero community, the term privacy coin isn't really liked. People prefer to call Bitcoin a surveillance coin as opposed to Monero a privacy coin. So yeah, that's my basic, I guess, answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that so many people don't even realize how the properties that Monero is claiming to have and has to one extent or another are extremely important for basic social justice and like equality at the law, because like with the tainting, like if you wanted to destroy, let's say, a leader of a protest, like as a character, as their reputation, you could send some of, tainted transactions, like you can send them Jeffrey Epstein Bitcoins to their wallet, and then they would never be able to prove there was no association because a mere picture with that person is now going to raise, skepticism and doubt about you as a character, as it should. But when you can do this, in a mathematical way, as is with a cryptocurrency based, in a cryptographic based currency, then people are just going to be completely distrustful of you as a person, and this can happen to anyone. This is why I'm worried about like receiving transactions, because like I don't even know. I cannot I cannot vet this. I cannot prevent this in any way, shape, or form. And yeah, it's a problem. And I don't understand how anyone in their right mind would be enthusiastic about Bitcoin when it's been like 14 years now, and it's still pretty much where it was at the beginning of the cryptocurrency. And only Monero, for me, only Monero is really trying to achieve fungibility, which is so important. And there are some cryptocurrency projects that are trying to do some sort of obfuscation to maybe be anonymous to an extent, or maybe be private to an extent, but none of them is truly fungible. And only Monero, for now at least, is fungible. And like even the US dollar, like all of the examples that you have said, like that's already happening with the current financial system that we have with the fiat currencies. Like you said, like how a supplier could like monitor your business activity. Like that happens on platforms like, Apple or Amazon, where if you have an app, these platforms can see how popular that app is with your users, and then they can make their own app and basically replace your app with their version of it. And that happens like with Amazon products. Like so many third-party resellers were invited to come on Amazon to sell their products there, and then Amazon decided to make their versions of the third-party products, and now they are outcompeting them because they have that insider knowledge into these third-party businesses. That's an unfair advantage. And yeah, we need a financial system that offers these qualities, that basically equalizes or levels the playing field for everyone. And Bitcoin just doesn't do this. If you want to be private or anonymous with Bitcoin, you would have to invest a lot of time and resources into making it so, and it would have to be continuous. Monero is sort of doing this on your behalf, and that's the most beautiful thing about it. My issue is that Monero, the adoption of Monero is still pretty technical. And that's the problem. Like you talked about the thinking people a lot. But my problem is that not that people are not thinking, is that people cannot be uniformly informed about these issues. So if you explain this to them, if you had the time to explain this to them, and in a way that they can understand, if they're not non-technical, then I think most people would care. But I would say that people are just not even aware that like insurance companies are using your credit card transactions to determine whether you are what is it called, whether you have some pre-existing conditions, or whether you are a liability for them in the future based on the purchases that you're making now. Like they can predict a woman's pregnancy, an exact birth date, just because of their purchasing records. So, and this is documented. None of this is like conspiracy theory or anything like that. And another example that you mentioned with the investigation, like this happened for real to a guy who was tainted by location information that was provided by, I think it was Google, might have been Apple, I'm not sure, from their phone number. And he was innocent. He also sued local police in local town because they published his mugshot in the local newspaper. He lost his job, he lost his wife, and all that stuff. But he was innocent. But his reputation was ruined nonetheless because of this, right? And you can do this with financial information as well. And Monero is pretty successful at this, right? It's very private and anonymous. But you mentioned physical security. And this is where my problem is, right? So if we expect people to be informed enough to understand Monero and understand why these properties are unique to Monero, and on top of that, we want them to use Monero, they would preferably have to handle their own, what's it called, seed phrase, or, encryption of the wallet and storing it securely. And all of these things, like you can say that people should be in charge of their own security, and it should be like individual sovereignty and stuff like that. But yeah, you can be an expert at this, and you're still gonna be sweating blood when you're trying to like make a $30,000 purchase over Monero or any other cryptocurrency. Because if you make a mistake, then all of that is gone. I mean, you could split it up and stuff like that, but it's still going to be a pain in the ass, right? So, and because of that irreversibility, there's just too much pressure on an individual user to be comfortable with using this, right? And this is why I mainly believe that while Monero will be successful at implementing these important properties like fungibility, privacy, opaqueness, and stuff like that, I think it will fail to be adopted on a mass enough scale because it's just too technical, and I think it will just remain technical because any sort of implementation on top of it, like some like PayPal, you can buy Bitcoins on PayPal. Like nobody should buy Bitcoins on PayPal because that defeats the whole purpose, right? But it might be easier for anyone to do it because you don't have to have any sort of know-how, right? And that's what I feel like. It takes some time to explain Monero, how to use the Monero wallet to people, and even though it's like it's designed beautifully and whatever, but like I don't know, I just feel like it's not gonna be adopted. That's the main thing.
Well, it took some time to explain people how to use a car, right? It took some time to explain to people how to use a computer, right? I mean, there's of course going to be some generational lag that is unavoidable. When I think people started telling Steve Jobs about how you need to be able to know how to type in order to be able to use a computer effectively. How are you going to solve that problem? Steve Jobs just replied basically that you're just going to have to wait for the non-typing generation to be replaced by the typing generation. And I think the technical barrier for becoming effective at using computers was rather way higher than the technical barrier that you need to overcome to be able to be proficient at using Monero. So it's, in my opinion, it's just a question of generational lag. It's certainly going to take some time, but overall, the positive externalities from this are too big to ignore. Most of the economy, like, a long time ago, we used to have an agricultural economy. Like 98% of the world GDP was in agriculture, right? And then we had the Industrial Revolution. And then now, when we're basically at the end of the Industrial Revolution, it's like agriculture takes like what, a couple of percent of the world GDP. And most of the world GDP is either industry or the service sector or the information sector. So now we have the information revolution, and most of the economy is moving into the information sector. Most of the money is being made in the information sector, and the proportion of the industrial sector as a ratio of the global GDP is declining. And who knows, maybe in 50 to 100 years, the industrial sector will also only occupy a couple of percent of the global GDP, while the remaining GDP will be completely in the information sector. Because problems, fundamentally, all problems are information problems. So if you take the money system that we have today, the fiat system, it is not maximally efficient for an information economy. The sort of clearing banks and the SWIFT system and the money printing and the whole complicated maze of international financial and monetary regulations and everything, like the loss of efficiency that happens is immense. And if you're a web developer in Australia, working for a company in, I don't know, Poland, having the ability to instantly send money without any intermediary, without any third party, with essentially a tap in the app or a click of the mouse, makes like the efficiency of that ability to send money so easily, compared to the financial system that is dominating the world today, the efficiency differential is enormous. And over time, the market favors efficiency. So I think over time, as adoption grows, and yes, you're right, adoption so far is growing slowly, but you have to remember that we are still within what was it, 14 years since Bitcoin's invention. Like, it hasn't even been a single generation since Bitcoin was invented. We're not even talking about when it became relatively popular, so people like didn't even know about it. I mean, how long did it take from the first computer to be invented to humans adopting personal computers on the scale that we have today? I mean, it took what, 50 years? So you have to have patience, and you have to. I mean, the fundamentals are there, right? The fundamentals that make cryptocurrencies, or Monero specifically, because it's fungible as opposed to Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have that fundamental, but Monero has it, at least today. And who knows what coin will have in the future that may be even better than Monero. Because, I mean, personally for me, I don't have loyalty that is specific to Monero. My loyalty, not the best word, but is to the concept of next-gen money. And that next-gen money has to be electronic, it has to be decentralized, and it has to be fungible, meaning it has to also be private. So currently Monero is the best candidate for that, but that may change in the future. And if that does change in the future, then I immediately switch to that, right? And that's the beauty of the sort of market competition that happens in the cryptocurrency space. Anybody can whip up some code, and if your code is better than what exists, then over time you will be adopted. So yeah, as I've said, the efficiency differential, the fundamentals are there, and it's just a matter of time before the generational lag catches up. That's my view on this topic.
Well, this generational lag idea is pretty interesting. So Apple was like created in 1970s, 80s.
Mm-hmm. Something around that time, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 40 to 50 years old. Now they are not even a computer company. Now they are a mobile company.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they went. It's a pretty good analogy. Like, yeah, things have, escalated like to completely like whole new level. Like nobody even expected for us to have like mobile devices, I guess, in the 70s or 80s or even 90s like this. So like advanced computer machines that are doing AI in our pockets, like that's a pretty big a leap. And I think that Monero has a lot of properties that are very important. I don't think it has a lot of properties or the fundamentals, as you said. I think some of the crucial ones are missing, and that's because the entire cryptocurrency community is dismissing them, and that's the money supply or the monetary control. And from my understanding, like Bitcoin was created as a response to the 2008 financial crisis, and how the federal government and the central bank, not just in the United States, but also like Iceland and UK, European Union, Japan, China, they were handling this by just covering the insolvent banks with essentially everyone else's assets, right? And they swapped the horrible, toxic subprime and mortgages and these CDOs and whatever from the banks with the good assets that the central banks had at the time, the trusted government assets. And they basically like destroyed the value in the fiat currency. Like there is no reason to trust that a US dollar, like a single dollar, can buy whatever today, because it can be completely different tomorrow. And now we are actually seeing what's happening with that. But at least from what I've been able to see, no one in the cryptocurrency market is actually a monetary policy expert. And they are not even talking about monetary policy, and I worry about that, Because if you want to have a stable currency that's being used, as you said with the example with the Australian developer in Poland, if you want to have that currency aspect that's global, you need to make sure that the value of the currency is stabilized to the total output of the economy. And none of the currencies are even addressing that at all, not even Monero. And I think that this idea that Bitcoin has, that it's fundamentally deflationary because it's a fixed money supply, it's not going to grow. Bitcoin people are blaming Monero for being inflationary because, basically the money supply in Monero can grow infinitely. There is a cap into how fast it can inflate, but this is the problem. Like, should that cap be decided by a group of developers, or should it be decided by monetary experts who are beholden to some sort of democratic accountability? Now, I'm not saying that the current central banking system is the proper way to do it, because I find there to be too many problems and issues with that. But I think that there needs to be some sort of accountability directed towards people who are deciding the monetary policy. Because if you want to have a currency that, you're going to spend 200 Monero to buy, let's say, a car today, but if that 200 Monero could buy you 2 cars a few weeks from now, it doesn't really make sense to be using that currency at all. And it's sort of like the more you hoard, the better it gets, and it sort of like breaks the entire economy, and people would be looking for another token to replace that, and they would be using Monero as just, like people are talking about Bitcoin, that it's, what is it called, like digital gold? Like, that's, to me, that's such a bullshit concept because it doesn't mean anything. And like, we are not using gold to buy things anymore with, and that's because gold is just too rigid, and you cannot just use it for like normal transactions. And if the value of Bitcoin is just going to fluctuate like this, people are just going to use Bitcoin as a token to use something else that's more stable. And currently that's like the US dollar, because even with the inflation, it's still more stable. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
I do.
On this particular issue. Okay, well, go ahead, because I don't know about monetary policy of Monero, and I feel like that could be the bottleneck that will never let go, and will just, you're optimistic about this generational gap, right? But and you could be right, but I think that if this bottleneck of monetary policy does not let go, then I don't think there's any amount of generations that could be replaced for the mass adoption to take place.
Okay, so you've touched upon a lot of things to do with monetary stuff. I'm going to try to unpack that as best I can. So one thing that you've mentioned is that you said that the money supply should be tied to, I think you said, the global economic output, right?
I mean, that's one theory that says this.
Okay, so the value of money, just like the value of any other product or service that exists, is determined by two things: supply and demand. So what really matters to a currency's stability is if supply and demand are kept in equilibrium always. But that is not something that can be achieved. I mean, it's the concept of a stable money, stable in the sense of its value never changes, basically throughout time, is not really a thing that it's like asking for a sea that never has waves. It's like asking for a sun that never flares. I don't know. It's the fundamental processes that underpin value determination under the laws of economics are in constant flux. And to have a currency or a product or a service of which the value of it is permanently constant is just it's like asking for a quantum soup that never generates virtual particles. You know, it's like particles constantly go in and out of existence, and there's just nothing you can do about that. And it's the same thing.
I mean, I don't think I was asking for what
I
did
think you
call
said
permanent
stable value.
consistency.
I may be wrong, but I think you said stable value.
Yeah, but the stable value is not tied to the foreign exchange. I mean, there is some policies that are being, directed towards that, but it's mostly about the basket of goods and services that a certain number of US dollars can buy you,
Yeah,
and this
but
is being tied.
that
Yeah, go ahead.
basket can get cheaper over time due to improved efficiencies in the economy. So if your basket of goods includes, let's say, a car, and let's say over 50 years we found more efficient ways of making cars, then it would make sense that the price of the car would go down, even if, relatively speaking, the currency was, stably priced. You see what I mean?
Yes, I do, but that's not necessarily related to the monetary policy because monetary policy is mostly
No, it doesn't.
concerned with the money supply. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, so if we talk about uh, previous examples of monetary policy throughout history, there seems to be. I mean, we're talking about central banks right now. There seems to be a sort of idea in macroeconomics, and some people debate whether this is even a real thing. But macroeconomics sort of tries to figure out also the questions relating to monetary policy, and what would be the optimal monetary policy. And there's so many different views on this. There's the Keynesians, there's the Misesians, there's the neoclassicals, and I mean, one thing we can all agree on is that there used to be a time before central banks. And during that time, people used gold. I mean, not throughout all of that time, but some of that time. Maybe even most of that time, at least in the history of civilization. People used, let's say, not gold maybe specifically, but precious metals. It could be gold, it could be silver. And gold and silver didn't really have a central bank, right? It didn't have a someone who made monetary policy. I mean, the gold and silver itself, not the governments that, let's say, tied their paper money to gold and silver. They, of course, could have some policy as to whether, a piece of paper costs this much gold or that much gold, or how you can convert it and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about the base asset itself, gold and silver. And gold and silver, I mean, while they don't virtually have any cap on their supply, in the sense of, okay, there is a total amount of gold that is present on planet Earth that is mineable to humanity, right? That is a certain cap, I guess. But this cap sort of ignores that, okay, well, what if we figure out how to do asteroid mining, which is, I think, a realistic possibility, given the fact that the costs of going into space have been dramatically decreasing over the past decade. We figure out a way how to mine asteroids. Well, asteroids have a lot of gold and a lot of silver and other precious metals. And, overnight we could basically double the gold supply if someone figures out how to do it, right? So by doubling the gold supply, we of course reduce the price of gold, right? Because once again, we return to the supply-demand equation. If the demand of gold stays the same, but the supply doubles, well, the price is going to go down. So this sort of fluctuation in the total supply of gold has historically also existed. There have been periods in history where, okay, only X amount of gold was available. And then somebody discovered Brazil, and they found a bunch of gold there. Well, now it's 1.3x of gold, and then somebody does something else, and now it's 2.7x of gold. So the supply of gold did increase historically, and yet, from at least the economic data that I have seen, the time period where the world relied on gold as the base currency of the world, there was much less economic crises, and the value of the currency was not, the supply of the currency was not tied to global economic output or anything like that. It just happened to be whatever it was due to the availability of gold and gold mining techniques at the time. So as long as a certain product, in this case gold, is not controlled by, let's say, the state through central banking, then the supply side of the supply-demand equation is relatively predictable, and the sort of response from the demand side in that case can always adjust to it. So that doesn't mean that the price of gold will always remain the same, or let's say the price of Monero will always remain the same, but it does mean that economic decisions are much easier, and they don't depend on the whim of a certain bureaucrat in a certain central bank board of directors. And of course, whenever we talk about central bank board of directors, the central bank, of course, serves the interests of the state, which some people might say might not always be aligned with the interests of the general population. If the US government needs more money to spend, they have a few ways of getting that money. One way is reducing the budget, reducing their spending. Another way is increasing taxes. And the third way is printing money, right? So the easiest way is, of course, to print money, because people really hate when you raise their taxes, and those who are in the budget, if their spending gets cut, well, they might also complain a lot. But inflation is a form of taxation that seems to have the least pushback, at least in the modern times. So there is always basically an incentive for governments to devalue money, and this comes at a cost of people not being able to save money. So the money that gets printed, it gets distributed to, let's say, banks and major corporations that have closest ties to the government. And the people that pay for all this are the people who are just keeping their dollars in their bank accounts. Well, if we had, let's say, Monero as the base currency, or gold. But, the problem with gold, in my opinion, is not that it has a rigid supply, even though it's not really rigid, as I've mentioned. It can be increased all the time through technological or other developments. But, despite this, the problem, I think the main problem with gold is the fact that it's not suitable really for the information age. It's not suitable for the transactions that I've mentioned of Australian web developers sending money to Poland, right? Like, you're not going to put a gold coin in an envelope and ship it to Poland. I mean, you can do that, but it's super inefficient, right? It's like it's going to take a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, and by that time, the value of the coin might have changed a little bit, which would perhaps require an additional payment or something, or a refund. So yeah, like, that's the main problem with gold. For me, it's like, it's not very practical for the modern world. It might have been practical for the ancient world, but not for the modern world. and certainly not for the future world. For the future world, we want instant digital, transactions. Gold cannot do that. You can say, well, you can put your gold in a depository and then do the depository, the exchange on the. Okay, yeah, you can do that, but then you lose the decentralized nature. You lose one of the trinity, the holy trinity of next gen money: the decentralized, digital, and electronic. Oh, sorry, and private. Sorry, fungible. So I think if you compare central bank money with gold, I think in the context of a non-information society, so pre-information society, I think gold wins out. But if you compare it to information society, gold loses to cryptocurrency. And I think if we look at the economic history of when gold was the dominant world currency, or gold and silver, versus when we adopted central bank currencies, I think it's very clear that the central bank currencies have been a source of a great amount of toxicity that pervades all aspects of life. I think there's a website, WTF happened in 1971.com, or was it 1972? I forgot. Do you know that website, Mr. Host?
No, I don't.
It basically shows a bunch of graphs, because 1971, I may be slightly wrong, maybe it was 1973, I forgot. But that was the year when Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard. The US dollar used to be tied to gold, which prevented the government's ability from, hyperinflating or inflating. But then Nixon removed the convertibility of gold and basically took the US off the gold standard. And basically, because he took the US off the gold standard, he by extension also took the rest of the world off the gold standard, because most governments relied on the US dollar as being fully convertible into gold. And that's why they held US dollar reserves, because at the end of World War II, the US basically had all the gold in the world, because people were paying the US for weapon shipments and for reconstruction efforts and all that kind of stuff, because historical reasons. Anyway, point is, the US had almost all of the gold in the world, and in exchange for that, they gave US dollars to other nations, and so other nations used US dollars as their reserve, but not because they liked US dollars, but because they were confident in the convertibility of the US dollars into gold, right? And then Nixon took the world off the US standard, off the gold standard, by taking the US off the gold standard. So it was a secondary effect. And when that happened, this is when you start seeing really an explosion in all the kind of metrics that people who care about social justice and social equality, and I mean all these sort of like median income, and how many years of income do you need to buy a house, and costs of education and costs of this and that. Like if you go on WTF happened in 1971.com, I think it's that website. You'll see all these graphs, and you'll see how toxic it was to remove the gold standard to the world economy and to the livelihoods of the average people, and of course to the benefit of of the bankers, primarily the bankers. Let's see if I can find the website. Just a second.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to respond to this
now?
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
Do you have something else to say?
No.
All right. Well, because I have a lot to say about this.
Oh, sorry. One more thing. Just
Okay.
a second. Oh, yes. The website is WTF happened in 1971.com. And what I wanted to say is, with regards to Monero and the inflationary policy of Monero, because you mentioned that, it's important to point out that the inflationary policy in Monero, known as tail emission. And we have an article on our website, by the way, about that. We have a section called the knowledge section where we cover a lot of topics to do with Monero and privacy and economics as well. The tail emission is like, if I remember correctly, 0.6 XMR per block. I may be wrong, but something around that. So it's not like a percentage, right? It's not like the money supply increases by 1% a year. It's the money supply increase in Monero relative to the total supply of Monero. That percentage of yearly inflation asymptomatically approaches zero. So if the initial, say, supply is I forgot what it was, but let's say it's 20 million. If you have like 0.6 Monero per block, and then let's say after a year that grows the total supply by whatever, I don't know, I'm not going to do the math, but let's say it increases by 5%. That means next year the total supply increases by whatever, 4%, and then a year after that it's like 2%, and then 1%, and then eventually it's like 0.0000. So it approaches zero, the yearly inflation, right? Because it's a fixed amount of Monero. It's not a proportional amount. It's not that the algorithm says to produce 1% per year. It says to produce 0.6 per block forever. So as the supply grows, the relative supply increase every year approaches zero. So that is sort of similar to gold's history in periods when gold didn't have these jumps in supply, like when Brazil was discovered, or if in the future they start doing asteroid mining and that doubles the supply overnight, right? If you don't take into account those kinds of jumps, the sort of the increase in the supply of gold is very slow and steady, and sort of approaching zero. And this is the same. Well, maybe it doesn't approach zero. I'm not a gold mining expert, so I'm not going to comment on that. But basically what I'm trying to say is that, yes, Monero is inflationary in the sense of the supply is constantly increasing, but that inflationary, it's not inflationary in the same way that central banks are. It's not a relative increase. It's an absolute increase, and that increase approaches zero, which I think there should be some emission. Number one, because of mining rewards, and which incentivizes the network to keep it secure. Because there's a huge problem and a big discussion right now in the Bitcoin community because of this. And one more thing is there is a certain amount of loss that occurs in cryptocurrencies. So, like, for example, if you have if you had a mnemonic seed that had 10,000 Bitcoin on it, and then you forgot it, or you lost it, or like it's irreversibly lost, those coins are now out of the system forever. They're never going to be back in the circulation, right? So that effectively decreases the money supply permanently. But in Monero, like, even if somebody loses some Monero, taking them out of the money supply permanently, they eventually get restored. So the money supply eventually goes back up to where it was, assuming there isn't a rate of loss that exceeds the rate of inflation. The money supply will keep growing. But who knows, maybe the rate of loss will at certain periods actually exceed, and the money supply will actually start going down. But Bitcoin is deflationary, at least as long as they maintain that policy, because who knows, somebody might change the source code of Bitcoin and introduce tail emission or some sort of inflation. And you talked about, oh well, how do we? Who decides? Like, where's the democratic control or whatever over this process of what the monetary policy is in a given cryptocurrency? Well, we do have something that I think is even better than democratic control in this case, which is the market. Like, the market decides if a certain cryptocurrency adopts a certain policy, right, monetary policy, that the market believes to be bad, well then less people will be using that currency and more people will be going to alternatives. And over time, even if a certain currency currently dominates, over time people will start switching, right? Just like people switch between existing currencies in the market. And I'm not just talking about cryptocurrencies, I'm also talking about fiat currencies, right? People, for example, when they save money, they look at, oh, should I keep my money in US dollars? Should I keep my money in euros? Should I use Singapore dollars? Should I use Japanese yen? Should I buy gold, right? So there's this constant competition happening between different monetary policies, and the same competition also is happening and will keep happening inside the cryptocurrency space. So if any cryptocurrency, whether it was through a democratic decision inside the developer community of that cryptocurrency, or it was a decision that was made by miners signaling in the network, or whatever, however that decision is taken, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is the market's response to that decision, right? And the market loves efficiency. So eventually, efficiency always wins. So if a certain currency is doing something that's monetarily wrong, well, then the market will respond to that. Okay, now I'm done.
Right. So there's so much to unpack here.
Oh,
So
yeah.
markets do not always choose efficiency. Markets tend to often fail. Not maybe not often, but they sometimes fail. Markets can be manipulated. They can be compromised. They can be externalities to completely destroy one part of the market system. They could destroy the supply. They could
What
destroy
about
the demand,
democracy?
and the market. Yeah. So democracy should stay out of the monetary supply in terms of population control over the money supply, because that was the current idea behind central banking. In the US, it's kind of different because there is the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve, which are supposed to be both doing some central banking policy, but the US Treasury is more concerned with democratic control than the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, you could say, that is not even part of the state, the government, because it's technically accountable to the Congress, technically, but it is mostly comprised of the boards of big financial institutions, members of the boards of big financial institutions. So yeah, there is currently no monetary policy who is democratically accountable, and that is because they are trying to. The idea behind this, at least officially, is to remove the political incentive from monetary policy. And the idea is that the decisions over monetary policy should be as pure and as educated without political emotions as possible. And responding to the graphs on the website, correlation doesn't prove causation. I mean, yeah, obviously, but you have a graph that's the number of heat strokes perfectly correlates with people eating ice cream.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that ice cream. Yeah, and they could have like a completely different cause behind them. So like the rising inequality from the 70s and especially 80s and 90s is due to many factors. Mostly you could say that the United States dollar has transitioned to the petrodollar to transacting the fossil fuels, and that market has been incredibly manipulated by the OPEC. So that could be one thing. You could blame deregulation of financial institutions, repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act, which I think happened in the 80s. You could blame defunding of public infrastructure projects for that as well. You could, yeah, there are plenty of things that you could say. You cannot blame all these macroeconomic trends on just a single policy decision. And when it comes to repealing of the gold standard, the U.S. government or the Federal Reserve, the government's ability to print the U.S. dollar was limited to the availability of, or the coverage of the gold, right? But the problem was that the gold supply was no longer sufficient to match the increasing economic efficiency of the American economic output. And that caused the deflationary aspect on the US dollar. And because of that, the US economy would be heading towards a massive recession if it only allowed US dollars covered by the gold to be circulated. So they decided to maintain the money supply of the US dollar in circulation to match with the rising economic output. And that has been the policy for like 40 years, let's say, 47 years, I guess, until 2008, when that changed, because until then, the US dollar was still backed by very secure government-issued bonds, which the government always pays its bonds. I mean, it's very rare when the government doesn't pay its debt. But that was still a very secure currency, even without the gold standard. But then in 2008, what I think that happened was much more severe than the repealing of the gold standard, and that was that you swapped these secure government bonds with the toxic derivatives and CDOs that the private financial institutions had, and that is now what's the balance sheet of the US dollar. And now the US dollar is phasing out, it looks like, it's phasing out of its global reserve currency status because, one of that aspects could be the sanctions on the Russian economy and the ruble, and sort of like the decoupling of the eastern part of the world's economy from the West, and sort of like them creating a new bloc, and more countries are actually starting to move towards that Eastern Chinese-Russian bloc than to the United States bloc. So like there's just way too many variables that influence the value of a currency or its status. And in cryptocurrency circles, people are just having this misguided idea that inflation is always bad and that zero inflation is just the way to go, or deflationary policy is good. In most sane monetary policies, deflationary monetary policy is just bad policy. And that's because when the value of your currency just keeps going up, then the people are losing incentive to spend their savings on investment. And if you're losing on investment, then you're losing on economic growth because you're building less houses, building less businesses, supporting less companies, etc., etc. So, it's not as clear and straightforward as many in the cryptocurrency tend to present, that the markets always choose efficiency and that the markets will decide, and this is just an issue of demand and supply. This is the problem. Like, supply of cryptocurrency is insufficient, and if we are not going to be using a deflationary system for our day-to-day currency exchanges, because it removes the incentive for the people to invest, right? So because all you want to do with cryptocurrency is to just hoard it or hodl it for as long as you can. And then you can cash out into a real currency and buy your home or house or investments and stuff like that. So this is a problem. And most people have the view like you do, which is that, inflation is bad and it's, we shouldn't have it and markets should decide. And if there is bad monetary policy in a given currency, people would switch to another one.
Well, I didn't say inflation was bad, actually.
It sounded like it, but okay, I'm gonna redact that. But it's because I've heard this argument before, and I've heard that it's demand and supply, but that's the problem. Like monetary policy if it doesn't reflect the economic output, then you're going to have problems, right? And like the Federal Reserve was founded in like 1900s. I'm not sure if it was 1903 or 1913, but it was created because before the Federal Reserve, you would have bank runs, and people would run on the banks because of rumors, because of whatever, and it would completely like crash the system for a little bit, like for a day or two, and people would just run on a bank, and the bank would just completely, be crushed, and because it would have insolvency, or even if you had a solvent bank, so many people would run on it that it would just run out of money and it would be completely destroyed. So the Federal Reserve was created to be sort of a lender of last resort, to give these banks that are insolvent some sort of a cushion to fall back on in case of this mass event happens. And the idea was to prevent these massive bank runs. And you could see that the value of the US dollar was just completely fluctuating up and down. And after the Federal Reserve was created, it was pretty much stable. But there was no such economic depression as it was in the 1930s before the Federal Reserve was created. And in my estimation, I blame the creation of the Federal Reserve for the Great Depression. Not just that singular event. Again, there is always going to be more than one event when it comes to these macroeconomic events, but the central bank policy did not prevent a Great Depression event like that the one that happened in the 1930s. And if people want to rely today on just the market supply and demand theory or hypothesis, because it's not a law, even though some economists pretend that it's a law. It's not a law. It's not always the case. There are things that are in demand and there is no supply for them, and there are things for which there is supply and there is no demand for them. And that in itself doesn't make things good or bad, or it doesn't make them efficient or not. And I think that because of the lack of interest in this issue in the cryptocurrency sphere, that's what I feel like is going to be that bottleneck. That we're not going to have that adoption because who would want to even spend any sort of cryptocurrency if its value just keeps going up, or if it fluctuates so much that it doesn't make any sense to want to spend it anymore. It's basically what we have created for now is a token. And that token, when it comes to Monero, has good properties that allow you to make payments or receive payments in a fungible, private, and anonymous way. But what you want to do is to immediately transfer those payments into a real currency like a US dollar or any other global currency, like fiat currency, because that's where you can spend it on normal stuff. But you cannot spend these tokens on regular stuff because there is this bottleneck, because there is no stability, there is no incentive for now. But that's not going to change unless people decide to address the monetary policy issue. And market and supply, the demand and supply is not going to solve this issue, right? Because there is the supply is fixed, and you explain this with the Monero tail emissions. It's fixed. It's not going to change. But because markets can rely on the supply of the US dollar roughly matching with the economic output, then they can, we know that inflation is going to stay roughly at 2%, let's say. I mean, now it's not. Now it's a fucked up time. But you could argue that now it's happening precisely because of that, right? So we've had COVID, we've had massive decrease of efficiency and economic output, and we have these logistics issues that are still happening today. We have global shortages of everything because of backlogs or whatever, but we are still printing more money, so we are creating this imbalance. So the economic output is down, and measurably in the United States is down. I think I think the US economy contracted in the first quarter of 2022, but don't quote me on this. There was definitely contraction during COVID, and the money supply just kept going up. And I think you could say that, well, this is the problem. Like the money supply maybe should not have gone up, right? Maybe it should have remained at the 2% or 3%, 4%, right? But cryptocurrencies, they have deflationary money supply. So things would be a lot worse if we relied on cryptocurrencies as our daily current transaction currencies. It'd be so much worse because it wouldn't be like we have hyperinflation. We just have complete economic depression because nobody would want to spend their currency on anything. And
Look,
yeah, go ahead.
Historically speaking, it's just not true. Like, you talk about the economic growth of the U.S. forcing Nixon to remove the U.S. from, and by extension the world, from the gold standard. I mean, Great Britain in the Industrial Revolution, which was, if I remember correctly, on the silver standard back then, because they had, I think, a gold and a silver. I may be wrong, but let's say it was the silver standard. During the Industrial Revolution, the Great Britain, the British Empire, experienced insane levels of growth, just unheard of before or since levels of growth, and yet they were on this deflationary, rigid, silver as their monetary supply. So, like, you can't just listen to what modern monetary theorists tell you about what money supply should be and how it should react to the economy and yada yada yada. You have to also see that despite what they are saying, it might be the case. And you mentioned, actually, this kind of ties in a little bit into what we were talking about at the beginning of our discussion with funding of research and the biases that it introduces, right? The kind of economists that talk about how it is essential, for central banks to exist or for them to have a certain policy are usually the kind of economists that are funded by governments, which of course want them to say a certain thing and perhaps not want them to say other things, right? So, like, this is not a very simple topic that can be discussed, or, well, it can be discussed, but it can't be unraveled even in a long form conversation like we're having now. Like, we need to actually be looking at concrete data and economic history and comparing, like, why was silver and or gold adopted as currency as opposed to salt or tobacco or stones at the bottom of the sea, and how it arose and why did it transition to the system that we had today. If you believe that the transition happened because of the US's, what was it, probably around 7%. I'd be surprised if it was more than 7% in 1971. Growth that forced the U.S. to remove themselves from, or was it something else? Were there other incentives at play in the Nixon government? Like, we really need to be looking at scientific levels of economic research to give a full picture. But I'm not saying that your view doesn't have its basis. Of course it has. It is a very popular view, especially in the, let's say, public sector of monetary policy research. But to be honest, I'm currently not prepared as well to discuss monetary policy as you seem to be, because you seem to think that this is the dominatingly important question in the adoption of crypto as next gen money. But let's say you're right. Let's say that everything you say is correct, and there needs to be some kind of a monetary policy that is inflationary or somehow accounts for global economic production that needs to be built in. Well, if there arises a cryptocurrency that does this, that is inflationary, or inflationary to the degree that you want it to be, then it will. And you say that markets don't always choose efficiency. I agree. If I said that they always choose efficiency, I misspoke. What I meant was that the markets tend towards efficiency, that they sort of are attracted to efficiency. And I don't want to convey the idea that if you take a snapshot of the market at any given time, that it will be in its maximally efficient position. No, I don't think that. But markets do tend, in my opinion, towards efficiency. And yes, markets have failures, but market failures are an exception rather than the rule. And yes, markets can be manipulated, but a lot of market manipulation can be attributed to coercion, which comes from the state. And some people might think that some forms of state coercion into the market are beneficial to most of the people that participate in the market. Let's say anti-monopoly laws or antitrust or Glass-Steagall or deregulation and everything that you mentioned with regards to that. But that's a separate topic for discussion, a very, very long discussion. I'm not going to touch that right now. But again, I think if we compare market mechanisms, which are not perfect, of course, because humans aren't perfect, to democratic mechanisms, I think in markets, like market failure is an exception rather than a rule. So like an example of market failure that I really like is when everybody, where market failure is defined as every actor in the market acting in their own interest, leading to a result that is negative for everyone, right? So like the easiest example to give here is when on an intersection there are cars, and during a green light, cars start driving into the intersection, and then the light switches to red, and cars that haven't yet cleared the intersection are stuck in the middle of the intersection. And during a green light, despite the blockage not clearing up, more cars start driving into the intersection, which prevents people that go in the perpendicular road from being even able to enter the intersection. So this is sort of every driver acting in their own interest, leading to nobody being able to get through that intersection, right? That is a market failure, basically. Everybody acting in their own interest leads to a negative outcome for everybody involved, right? Whereas normally, or at least in the neoclassical view of normally in economics, right? People acting in their own interest, setting up businesses, right? You benefit yourself because you earn a profit, but you also benefit your customer because you gave them something that to them was worth more than the money that they gave you, because otherwise they wouldn't have given you that money, right? So we have a positive externality on both sides here, right? So this is the normal situation in the market, whereas market failure is like an exception in the market. But in democracy, like the amount of manipulation and perversion and failures seems to be not exceptions but the rule, right? But I forgot what I was going.
I mean, not necessarily. Depending on how you implement democracy. I mean, from my perspective, democracy is not really good at making decisions, but it's good at removing corruption from the government.
Yeah.
What?
I remember why I started talking about this. We were talking about the monetary policy and the control over monetary policy, right? So, monetary policy in the crypto aspect here, if you are indeed correct, and there has to be a fungible crypto that is inflationary or somehow responds to global demand. I don't know how that would be done, but let's say it can be done. Then once somebody comes up with that, and assuming the generational lag is over, and there has come the time for not just El Salvador and the Central African Republic to adopt crypto, but all the world starts adopting crypto. And, this is when the real crypto wars begin. I mean, crypto wars in the sense of which crypto becomes the dominant world reserve currency, right? And people will start using them and seeing like, okay, I'm going to keep half of my savings in Monero, and I'm going to keep the other half of my savings in Inflationero, and let's see, which one I prefer. And then governments start seeing the effects on the economy, and businesses start seeing the effects on their bottom line, and everybody sees what happens to them. And then we might end up in an equilibrium where, for example, people keep their money as savings in Monero and spend Inflationero. Or maybe because people start accumulating too much savings in their Monero, the adoption of Monero goes lower, and because less people start accepting it, then more people switch to Inflationero, and then Inflationero becomes the dominant currency, and Monero goes into the dustbin of history. Like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 2 generations. So whatever happens, I feel like as long as people are able to choose what they want, and as long as the alternatives exist, and with the case of crypto, it's very easy for alternatives to be created, unlike, central bank policy, where you need to have, massive democratic outcry for a certain policy to be implemented. And even then, it's not guaranteed. And even then, they're probably going to somehow corrupt it, Whereas in crypto, if you can write the code, and if you publish it, and if people think it's good, then slowly it's going to start being adopted, and over time it's going to grow, or maybe not, depending on how successful it is, So we have the platform for what you want to happen to actually happen, and the equilibrium in the end might even be multipolar. You might have 2 parallel currencies, or multiple parallel currencies that exist, some of which are inflationary, some of which are deflationary, and there might even be a central bank currency coexisting with this whole system, because that would be, for some reason, the optimal distribution, or close, or tending towards the efficient distribution of currencies and money in the market. In the end, as long as people are able to decide what to use, the end configuration should be close to efficient.
Well, efficiency is a subjective matter, I would say. Efficient towards what?
Efficient
that's a good question.
In the sense of path of least friction overall in the economy.
Yeah, but sometimes friction might be good because direction could be bad, right? Because
True.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, there is a wing of economists that believe that whatever they say is exact science, and that wing is mostly libertarian economists. And
yes, that's true.
I mean, it's true. That's true. But the thing is, economics is not a science. It's not an exact science. It's not a branch of mathematics. It's a social science, and that's it. And you can have experts in that for sure, but they're always going to be wrong and right at the same time about some things. And there is no such thing as the right monetary policy. There's nothing that this is how it should be because this is what the mathematics is telling us.
Yeah,
it's not mathematics.
Small correction. Sorry for interrupting, but you said libertarian economists are the only ones that claim absolute truth. It's actually a sub branch of quote unquote libertarian economics, known as Oh, I'm gonna get so much hate for not instantly remembering this word. Not Misesian. What's that word? You know which one I'm talking about? Because there's the neoclassical libertarian economists, like a la Milton Friedman or David Friedman.
Yeah.
And there's also the
To be honest,
Hayek
I'm pretty
and
confused.
Mises.
I'm pretty confused.
Oh, Austrian,
I'm
of course.
confused
My
about
God,
it.
I'm so sorry.
Austrian economics, yeah, Austrian school, yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
Austrian economics. God, oh, I feel so
yeah.
so
Yeah.
shaky. I hope you can redact
I thought
the part where I'm thinking about this because it's really shameful. Okay, so Austrian economists, yes, they are very dogmatic about their approach towards economics because they believe, as far as I understand Austrian economics, they believe that as long as it is coherent within their system of logic, then it must be true, basically. Whereas other libertarian economists, or quote-unquote libertarian economists, such as neoclassical economists, they actually don't believe that. They believe that if you have an economic theory, you have to test it with real-world data. But you have the counter-argument for that as well, which is, well, okay, real-world data might agree with you here, but you can always find data to fit whichever thing you want to state because it's an inexact science, it's a social science. You can't do a perfectly controlled scientific method style experiment with perfectly reproducible results because people are constantly in flux, right? That is true at least for now. Though there have been
this is my main problem, right? Mm-hmm. So market efficiency, right? Child labor is efficient. Slave labor is efficient.
No, actually, right? Debatable. Debatable.
No, I mean, not necessarily. It is pretty efficient for you to own a slave as a human being rather than give them workers' rights, right?
Debatable.
It is efficient. Always debatable, but it is. But it is efficient. It is efficient to have human trafficking or to have I don't know, animal abuse or stuff like that. It is efficient to do many things that should not be done.
So with regards to true about some things, but just in the case of slavery, in the American Civil War, a lot of economists attribute the northern economic efficiency over the South, specifically to the fact that wage workers were much more productive than slaves, because slaves not only did they not want to perform the labor for obvious reasons, it also cost a lot for the slave owners to maintain them because you still have to feed them, you still have to clothe them, you still have to
retrospectively, it doesn't matter because it wasn't the market that decided; it was the government that decided. It was the military that decided.
Yes.
Likewise, it wasn't the corporations that decided to abolish the child labor. It was the unions that decided that. It wasn't the corporations that decided to give people a weekend off. It was the unions and the government that decided that. So, plenty of things that have been introduced into our modern society that we take for granted have nothing to do with market efficiency.
No. Unions are a market mechanism. It's producers of when you're a laborer, what you do is you sell your time, right? You offer a service, and if multiple producers
this was a war. This was a war. There was a hot war between workers and corporations. It was an actual war.
Well, there was certainly violence, but I just wanted to say that a union is a thing that exists within the market because it's a voluntary association of laborers who bargain together against, let's say, a corporation. It's a union is not something that exists outside of the market. It is part of the market because it is a voluntary association.
It could exist. It could exist within the market, but the unions in the 19th century, they were not what the unions are today. The unions today are peacekeeping, gatherings. Back in the day, these people were malicious. and they were fighting. And this is actually true in some like less developed countries where corporations are hiring death squads to go after people who are trying to unionize or to go after indigenous tribes, right? So like
That's awful.
that is awful, and it is efficient to burn down a rainforest and build a plantation there, and in the process kill a bunch of tribes. And yeah, it's market doesn't have an answer for this, and market doesn't have an answer to many questions. So that's my point. So like that was the whole thing with the monetary policy emphasis in cryptocurrency, because it's just completely lacking, and everybody thinks that, well, the market is just going to decide that. Well, what if markets don't decide that? What if there is no currency that comes up? What if there is that comes up that's inflationary? What if, like anything could happen? And I'm not saying that governments have the solutions. I'm not saying that current federal policy, central bank policy is the right solution, because I don't think that's the case. I'm just trying to be critical of this and not have this blind faith in something. And I'm not saying that you do have that blind faith either. I'm just seeing that a lot in the cryptocurrency sphere, and I think it's mostly used by these people who are trying to manipulate people into buying their services or pump and dump cryptos and stuff like that. So like, I want the crypto people in the crypto sphere, the cypherpunks, to completely reject this idea that markets alone will be able to decide this, and be open to the possible failures and limitations of the current cryptocurrency projects, which I think have to be admitted, because if they're not, then they're not going to be addressed at all. And I think the best cryptocurrencies can achieve with where they are today is just for them to be tokens, and that's it. And they could change, but they have to address that monetary solution. And yeah, I have a problem with current monetary policy. I have a problem with it because they like you said, the government has an incentive to devalue their currency and hyperinflate. That's actually not how the government is using the central bank. Most governments don't even have access to central bank decision making, because it's completely outside of the traditional decision making process in modern democracies. Like central banks are acting in a limbo basically, and yes, they can be restricted by the government, but it doesn't happen on regular basis. And central banks are making decisions not to increase government spending. That almost never happens. They do this to provide liquidity to financial institutions. But this is my problem with it. If I don't have liquidity, there's no one coming here for my rescue. But if a bank that has a terrible CEO that doesn't care about its bank's survival and its customers, which happens all the time, which is also efficient, because it's efficient for the CEO to run their company into the ground, for their company to be bought out by another company for a merger, and then get a massive paycheck and fuck all the investors, because that's what happened in 2008. And these people are getting liquidity. These people are getting support. But, a couple, or parents with their family, they're not getting liquidity. They're not getting any sort of support. They can end up on the streets and no one cares about them, right? So this is my problem with crypto. It's being sold like this fundamental solution to the current central bank policy problem, which is real. It's a real problem. But what is going to happen, and what is happening with Bitcoin, is that much of it, like so much of it, is just owned by such a small percentage of people who are now incentivized to hoard it, and it removes everyone else's ability to participate in the system, because it makes entry into Bitcoin so much more expensive. This is something that could be solved with a reasonable inflationary policy, which Bitcoin doesn't have, and I don't think it's gonna have, because the incentive is to just keep the deflationary aspect of it. And I would be happier if Monero was trying to do this, because if it truly wants to be a real currency and not just a token, then it should address this aspect. And I'm not sure if it's going to. But I think that if people in the Monero community are listening to this and they have any ideas about how this could go, I don't think there's gonna be consensus on this topic. Maybe you disagree, maybe there is consensus, I don't know. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of new ideas and discussions about this, because I don't know. I just feel like that if Monero wants to be successful in the future, as you said, like, being accepted as a currency, I think it has to give everyone a chance to participate in it, no matter what time, here or in the future, they are, opting into it. Because with Bitcoin, the sooner you get in, the better you are. But the later you get in, the worse you are, the worse off you are. And if you want to have a real currency, it shouldn't matter when you decide to start using it. It should always be the same.
Well, I mean, is it not the case that the first people who mined gold were in a better position than the later people?
I think this is completely irrelevant, because gold is not a currency.
Well, I mean, it used to be for most of civilization's history, right?
It used to be, but it's not anymore. And the people who had gold were better off than those who weren't. That's a bad system. But also, you were not dependent necessarily on gold for you to have a living. You would be dependent on your own labor, on either your property or someone else's property, depending on what kind of a system we are talking about. Yeah, but if it's feudalism or something else.
We're talking about like as a medium of exchange. Gold was adopted, including by normal people who were selling their labor in exchange for it, right?
Most people did not have access to gold. That was the problem. And it's the same problem with Bitcoin. Most people do not have access to it. Will not have access to it.
Why do you think that most people didn't have access to gold? It was used primarily as the medium of exchange for everyone.
Most people were not for most people. Most people did not have access to gold. It was just too expensive for them. Most people were getting, some people were getting silver. Most people were getting copper
silver
coins.
too. Yeah, sorry. When I say gold, I should clarify. I mean both gold and silver. I'm just saying just gold to be.
Yeah, silver tended to be also very expensive for a lot of people. Most lords and nobility, they did use gold and silver, but most like peasants, they were just paid in copper or nickels or whatever.
Okay. Well, I guess. I should.
And it was a problem because they were excluded from trading like more expensive goods and services and make investments.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think to try to operate in your perception of what money should be. Let's say that it really should be the case that it at the creation or at whatever point in a currency's existence, there should be some kind of equitable distribution, such that it doesn't matter at which point you happen to be born or at which point you happen to enter this system, that you get an equal piece of the pie. It is not inconceivable to me that such a currency can be developed. I mean, in the sense of cryptocurrency, that you can write code that would allow everybody to enter on equal terms, right? Though I'm not exactly confident that you can keep everyone on equal terms. I don't think that's something you can really.
No, that's not even what I'm asking for.
Okay.
My problem is that because Bitcoin is deflationary, the incentive of people who have it is to just keep it and not use it, and that's what creates this artificial barrier. And it is artificial because it's all artificial, and just like people's belief in gold's value is artificial, but this is even more so because it's just creating scarcity where there doesn't need to be one. It's just written in code, and some people believe that code is law, which code is not law. Code is code, and yeah, I mean, it's
Isn't it
yeah,
the case
this
that as the amount of the effective money supply goes down, meaning what you talk about hodling, right? When somebody hodls, they effectively reduce the money supply because they don't want to put the coins back into circulation. They want to keep them, right? Isn't it the case that as the effective money supply is reduced, assuming constant demand, that the price would go up? So if the price goes up, that means you are now more incentivized to sell it. Is that not the case? Because
no, the
you
price
have
is
to
the price is the
you
price
have
is
to
determined by
take
many more
into
factors than money supply.
I didn't say it was determined by money supply. I said there's supply and demand, and assuming demand stays the same, if the effective supply goes down, that would mean that the equilibrium between supply and demand is now higher at a higher price. Is that not the case?
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
so if your assets now cost more than they used to cost before, doesn't that mean that you now have a bigger incentive to sell? So because you have to keep in mind that it's like the deflationary aspect is not the only incentive structure at play here. There's also your time preference, right? How much you want to buy. Apple releases an iPhone, and let's say it's iPhone 13. And let's say today it costs, $1,000. And you have the choice between buying the iPhone today for $1,000 or waiting, let's say, a year until the next generation comes out and buy the iPhone 13 at a lower price in a year. Let's say it'll cost, instead of $1,000, it'll cost, $650, right? So just because something decreases in value if you wait, right, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to choose to wait, right? There's another thing at play here. There's your time preference at play here, right?
Right. Nothing in economics means anything necessarily.
Right. So the same logic can be applied to your argument. You're talking about how people are incentivized to keep holding the Bitcoin because they expect it to go up in value. But as it goes up in value more and more, the time preference starts winning over more and more. Right. It's a self-balancing system, is it not?
No, it's not a self-balancing system because then deflation wouldn't matter, and it does matter because when deflation happens, the price of goods and services decreases, which might be good for consumers for a while, but then companies have less incentive to keep up with the production. And if all else being equal and deflation keeps happening, then you are fundamentally hurting the supply, and then supply will no longer deliver, and then
that is the mainstream sort of explanation to this. But again,
nobody knows what's going to happen at any point in time. These are hypothetical frameworks where you say all else being equal, this could happen. You don't know if this is going to happen, but it could happen. So deflationary economics incentivizes hodling. It disincentivizes. Everything is up to a point. That's the whole point of economics, and that's the thing. Like what you could say, what you said could happen, but it does not necessarily have to happen. You would say that that would mean that supply would keep up to maintain efficiency and equilibrium. But that's not a rule. It doesn't have to be in the equilibrium. It doesn't have to lead to efficiency. And that's the thing here, because Bitcoin has been so stagnant in changing its own algorithm that it's so expensive to even transact on it. That was the case also on Ethereum.
Yep.
And you keep having these bottlenecks because miners and people who are hodling Bitcoin are just incentivized against making Bitcoin more accessible to everyday users.
True.
Because they want to keep the value of the Bitcoin that they already have going up. And this is the problem. The people that got into Bitcoin early got into it not because of the belief in the cypherpunk ideals. They got into because they only wanted to increase their own wealth. And if you just keep letting this feedback loop happen for a long enough time, then you're creating negative externalities for everyone else. It's efficient, but only for a couple of people that are in the game. For everyone else, they're screwed. And this is why I don't believe in any single solution for anything, because this is such a multipolar issue that cryptocurrency could be a part of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cryptocurrency could be a part of it, but I don't believe in this idea that people say that Bitcoin fixes everything. Like, it doesn't. It probably doesn't even fix anything. And Monero does fix some things. It does fix like cryptocurrency privacy and fungibility issue, but it doesn't make itself more accessible in the future. And Monero went out of its way to make itself resilient to mining pools, right? Or ASIC mining.
Yeah.
So that they would maintain this ethos that one CPU equals one vote or whatever. But there is no. I don't see a reason for Monero to not make itself also resistant to monetary manipulation, or like price manipulation or value manipulation, because the value of Bitcoin, like, there is no reason that the value of Bitcoin should be any number that it is today. Like, if it's $38,000, it is 48, it is 108. It like, there is no reason for it to be that value. So the value in the US dollar, it should not matter. What should matter is how much stuff people can actually buy on everyday basis with Monero or any other currency out there. And if that number just keeps fluctuating up and down, but it tends towards these astronomical numbers, then people are not going to be trusting, in general, people are not going to be trusting in that currency, because they would not want to be saving it, they would not want to be investing it. And it's
well, you're talking about Godwin's law.
Yeah.
Good money drives out bad money. Good money drives out bad money, or is it the opposite? Godwin's law is Godwin's law, right? I'm
not sure. Probably not.
So let's say you have actually a good historical example of Godwin's law, as cited by Milton Friedman in his TV series Free to Choose, is that in the American colonies, one of the mediums of exchange that they used was tobacco. And so tobacco as a currency is not exactly fungible, because you have like some tobacco that's better quality and some tobacco that's worse quality. So what would happen is, when people paid with tobacco, they always paid with like the lower quality tobacco that they had, and then they would hodl all the good quality tobacco that they had. And then eventually it came to a point where the only money that was used for transactions was the bad tobacco, right? So again, basically, if it is the case that something like Monero is not good for transacting on a day-to-day basis, but is pretty good for hodling, right? It's good for storage of value. which is, an important thing for the average person to have. In fact, I would argue that one of the biggest reasons why we see people suffering nowadays is because they don't really have good avenues to save their money, to store their money such that the value of their money doesn't get eroded over time. So if you can have, Monero or another fungible cryptocurrency, not as a medium of exchange, but just as a store of value, that's already a pretty good achievement, I think, for the cryptocurrency space. And if you have a second cryptocurrency that is inflationary, or maybe not inflationary, but somehow allows everyone to enter it under relatively equal circumstances, right? What you talked about, like there is a asymmetry between people who entered at the beginning of Bitcoin and those who are entering later, right? If there is a crypto that can eliminate that, and perhaps it would be inflationary, then people would be incentivized to pay in that inflationary currency and store the deflationary, let's say, currency, and the two can coexist in an equilibrium. Or the central banking system might keep existing, as I mentioned before. So I have to say, while it's not, of course, it's not given that we will end up in this equilibrium, right? Like you said, like things aren't always at equilibrium in the market. Certainly true. But I think it's a pretty good chance, and I'm optimistic. And whether it's just Monero or just Bitcoin or Bitcoin plus Monero plus central bank or whatever the configuration may end up being, I think overall it's going to be better than what it used to be. I think it's going to be better for the average person than what it used to be.
Well, I think in my closing statement to this, I would say that I'm looking for a currency that if I was paid in June and I would spend it in December, it would roughly buy me the same amount of goods and services. And I would be able to rely on that fact that I don't have to exchange it to another token. I could just keep it within that currency, within that network, and it's no longer a token, it's a real currency. This is what I'm looking for. And Monero is not a real currency yet. It is pretty close because it has many properties that I am looking for in a real currency, like financial privacy and anonymity, and fungibility. And that's mostly because of the importance of these issues to prevent abuse and to maintain justice and equality, especially when it comes to, oppression from the side of the government or fraud and stuff like that. But I think I also need to have that reliability that, okay, well, if I can buy 200 apples with 1 Monero today, I'm going to be able to buy them in December as well. Or, all else being equal, provided I live in, California, where there are apples all year, I guess. But it's this is the only reason I'm skeptical of it, that no one is seriously interested in addressing this issue at all. Like, they all say that this is going to be decided by the market and that's all going to be good. I don't trust that at all. I don't have any reason to trust markets over the government or vice versa. I'm just generally a distrustful person, and yeah, that's I guess that's all I wanted to say. But I'm glad that you challenged me here, and yeah, I've been having these arguments with a lot of people also when it comes to like Odyssey. There's also a blockchain and cryptocurrency project or library, I guess it's called. And I've been having this discussion with Close Network as well, and we didn't reach an agreement necessarily as well. I don't know. I guess I'm stubborn, but
Did I at
yeah,
least introduce some points that you believe to be somewhat interesting?
yeah. I mean, I'm not discounting your points. I mean, you are raising, pretty good. What am I even trying to say? My brain is fried. you, you you definitely make good points. I'm not discounting that. I'm just like, yeah, could someone please like address this monetary issue as well? Like, we should not unilaterally accept that deflationary policies is universally good, right? So
You don't
like
have to
maybe
in
let's think
crypto.
about, yeah,
That's the difference between
yeah. I
government and
mean,
crypto. Like government, whatever they say,
mhm.
that's what it is. Crypto, if you don't like it, fork it, change the code.
Right, yeah, right, yeah. So that's the same argument as well. If you don't, if you're censored on social media platform, just make your own social media platform. Yeah, I mean,
I
yeah.
mean, the network
You
effect
could all,
is very strong. It's true, but it is possible to overcome
yeah.
it. If you don't like MySpace, make Facebook.
Mm,
MySpace doesn't go away overnight, but if Facebook is better, then it tends to dominate. And then Facebook was
mm,
dominating for a very long time, and now it seems
no,
to be
I don't
dying.
believe. I don't believe in these solutions. I think that consent-based solutions are better. So, for example, like a
That
peer-to-peer
is a
network,
consent-based
like
solution.
no, because a platform is by definition not a consent based system, because you can only give consent once, and that's when you sign up, and then you can just leave or accept it all. But a purely like consent based system where you are consenting throughout the use as well would be a peer-to-peer system that allows you to
Oh,
proactively choose your own network,
I
your
see
own
what you
social
mean.
graph.
I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I guess the internet is that system, isn't it?
Mm, not necessarily, because you have to rely on the backbone infrastructure for the internet to work. Not always, but in most cases, if you have a sufficient mesh network where at least one point is able to connect to the global network, then you could say that. But on the internet, you are asking for the internet doesn't even exist. You are connecting to someone's private network, and the only reason the internet works is because that private network has a peering connection with some other private network somewhere else. And that's not even technical, that's just a business or business agreement or something like that. So if that network decides that you're only going to have access to channels or websites that are only from our network, like Verizon could say, you're only going to have access to Verizon approved websites, that's your internet for you, and you have nothing you can do about it. You can go to another network, but if that network does the same, you have only AT&T websites, then that's your internet there,
Well, what about
and
Starlink?
etc. And Starlink can do the same as well. Like, it doesn't even matter, it's just another provider. It's yeah, there it this is internet is not a permissionless system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I understand what
it's
you're saying.
decentralized to an
Yeah.
extent, but it's not permissionless.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Well, in China's case, right? It's like it's really not even up to the ISP to decide what you
No,
can and cannot see.
right?
It's just the government
Yeah,
installing the
yeah,
firewall,
yeah.
yeah. But
I
I
mean, a
think
true decentralized permissionless system would be like if every single device on the planet would be part of a mesh network that would constantly and indiscriminately transmit all the data between among each other between every device, and there would be like no central point of failure, no central decision maker, just all data just passing through it by default.
yeah, that would be very nice. Maybe we can convert Wi-Fi into a global mesh network. Who
You
knows?
could do that, and every mobile, not just mobile, like you have wearables, you have Internet of Things, like they're all connected. They could all have Wi-Fi's, and this works better if you are like in a densely populated area, of course.
Right.
So it could even exacerbate this splinternet problem that we are currently trending towards. But yeah, my ideal is to have something like Briar or Kutch, if you're familiar with it. I don't know.
Yes,
They
I
are
am.
peer-to-peer. Yeah, they're peer-to-peer messaging platforms, and their only problem is they are not meshing their connection. So it's just peer-to-peer. But this is the consent-based model where you are completely in control of who gets to communicate with you and who you communicate with. And I think it would be a step better if there was a meshing mechanism. And I'm not sure if we are even there technologically because now we have the problem with the bandwidth and stuff and the battery usage. Um, but I think this would be like a real solution that I am looking forward to. Yeah, this is kind of like my peer-to-peer utopia.
I get it. I understand what you mean by consensual now. I was a bit confused. But basically what you mean is peer-to-peer. Purely 100% peer-to-peer in all aspects. Not
Yeah, like
relying on
no
ISP.
intermediaries. Yeah, no intermediaries whatsoever, and everyone is oblivious to how the data or the devices are used. So like hardware manufacturers are completely out of the decision making process and what kind of data is being transmitted through it. So like Verizon is your hardware, right? They are making your pipes,
Right.
but and they can decide what goes through those pipes. They can also inspect what goes through them. But like if you have hardware manufacturers who are just making Wi-Fi devices, then they are in no control whatsoever, and it's purely up to the users, up to the end clients to decide what goes through and what doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that I would also prefer a complete peer-to-peer mesh network to be the global internet as opposed to what we have today. Yeah, I think that is the much better way to do the internet. And I think that as we develop more awareness of the need for this, I think more and more people will start sort of maximizing their participation in the mesh network. And who knows? I mean, maybe people will even start launching their own satellites, Starlink, sort of like an open source, a free and open source Starlink alternative that will become the new global internet. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Of course, there is definitely going to be a trend towards the opposite direction, towards the re-centralization of everything, and there's going to be more and more government initiatives, and not just like everyone just says China or Russia, but it's not just in those countries. It's also like European Union is also trying to sort of re-centralize their internet there, and they are actually pretty bureaucratic or technocratic about it, and they're actually pretty successful at it. Like with the GDPR and with all these regulations, when they decide to do something that actually usually goes through pretty easily for them there, it's a lot harder to do something like this in the United States, I would say. But even the United States has pretty, I mean, it's pretty re-centralized, and it's definitely controlled by just the handful of the U.S. corporations, whether that's telecommunication providers or edge providers, and they became platforms with a quasi-monopoly, quasi-infrastructure status, like Amazon Web Services. And I don't trust any of these solutions, and many of the libertarians are actually they're optimistic about it because as long as they are private, all is good. But my solutions would completely remove the need for any intermediary at all. That's what I believe would be perfect, because then you don't have the problems with like central algorithms and these news feeds and stuff like that. It will be up to the people to decide whatever they want, and I think there will always be like abuse or whatever that's bad, of course, and we would need to have some sort of solutions for that, like police work or investigation. But yeah, I'm pretty extreme in this, like in what I would consider to be a true solution. I'm not going to be happy with like a solution that's only like halfway there.
You seem to be applying this sort of radicalism towards a lot of aspects of what you do, and I think it's very commendable.
I don't know if it's commendable. I don't know. I just really have deep trust issues.
No, no,
And
no.
that's
Do your thing. Do your thing, man. It's don't let anyone tell you how to do your thing. That's I think that's the main. Like you might get controversy over your position, but as long as what you are doing you truly believe to be the best, you're fine. You have your own heart and it's guiding you.
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to do my best, but I I I think like this healthy culture of accepting criticism is important, and also like giving criticism as well. And the problem is that these social media platforms, they're doing an amazing job at creating this bubble of people who just love you, and you will always have like 98% like to dislike ratio, and that's gonna make you feel like, oh, you're doing an amazing job, when in reality you are just a complete fuck nut. And that's kind of like I'm trying to escape that bubble and live in the real world where people are actually where their real positions actually are. And it's important to have this kind of criticism. So when I make a video where I criticize someone, I made a video where I criticize Signal, and Signal is almost universally regarded as the gold standard for messaging. And yeah, the content is properly protected, but the metadata is not so well protected. It
You
is
gotta
much
use
better
your
than
phone
WhatsApp.
number. How can you
Yeah,
promote a thing that requires you to use your phone number?
I mean, I mean, the phone number is a problem, especially in countries where your phone number is tied to your identity, and
Exactly.
that can completely remove your ability to even have Signal in the first place. Um, but again, like this is what I would say. Like, okay, well, Signal did something right. Of course, like normalized end-to-end encrypting messaging, and they brought it down to like regular people, so it's foolproof. But we need something more. We need metadata resilience. We need anonymity. We need a permissionless system, because someone could just throttle Signal servers, and then your end-to-end encryption communication is done because it's not available, right? So like we need to have more. Like security is not just confidentiality, it's also integrity, and it's also availability. And if you don't have all of these three, then you don't have security. And uh, yeah, that's kind of like in a lot of like the crypto solutions, like cryptocurrency solutions, are kind of like halfway there, because they're not thinking about all the aspects of security, or and like if you're not thinking about all of these aspects, then I don't consider your solution to be a true solution. It's just halfway there, and I will be looking for something else now or in the future.
Yeah, we live in a world of compromises, and progress is often incremental as opposed to
Yeah.
what we want it to be. Yeah, that's just something that unfortunately we have to live with, and the generational lag that I was talking about, and the incrementalism lag, like it's all there, and it's frustrating. But as long as we're moving in the right direction, I'm optimistic.
I mean, it's good to talk to an optimist, definitely. I sometimes, I sometimes fall victim to doomerism too much, but I'm trying to be optimistic as well, because there are some optimistic trends. I mean, um, sometimes it feels like all of these horrible dystopian sci-fi novels were right, but sometimes like there are good developments. And yeah, it's good that you are optimistic, and it's good that you came here to spread your optimism as well. And it's good that you voiced your disagreements with me. We should not be afraid of doing that, and we should not feel like that's the start of a drama. I think that it's okay for us to disagree on certain aspects, and I don't think that necessarily makes us enemies, or calling each other out or something like that. Yeah.
I completely agree.
Thank you.
It was a very good discussion. I enjoyed it. And we were planning for 2 hours. We're, I think, going over 3 now. And actually, it went by pretty fast. I could.
It did, yeah. You're good company, and it's easy to enjoy your talk. So I think, yeah, this is awesome. I think people will enjoy this too. And if you want to share where people can find you, stalk you, and maybe find your company.
At Local Monero Co. is the Twitter handle. The website is localmonero.co, C-O, not .com, .co. And also agradesk.com is the extension of Local Monero that also supports trading Bitcoin in the same private and peer-to-peer way that we do it on Local Monero. We have a very long Tor portal, so I'm not going to pronounce it, but you can find it at the footer of our ClearNet website if you prefer Tor. And if you're serious about privacy, you should in some cases prefer Tor. Let's see, what else? Matrix. We have a Matrix room, which is a bridge to our Telegram group. The Telegram group is at Local Monero or at Agradesk, if you prefer the Bitcoin trading aspect. And the Matrix room is hashtag Local Monero, colon, agradesk.com. Or for Agradesk, it's hashtag Agradesk, colon, agradesk.com. Did I say localmonero? Oh no, agradesk.com. That's right. Okay. So yeah, I can be reached personally on Telegram at Alex_localmonero_agradesk, or on Matrix, preferably, please, at Alex agradesk.com. And I think that's about it. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Mr. Host. It was a wonderful discussion.
Yeah, thank you for coming here again and again. I mean, this is the first time. Yeah, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you again.
This was awesome, Alex. Yeah, thank you again. Yeah.